Greetings, Pathfinders, and welcome back to the Absalom Archives. Funny thing, I wrote the original intro to this video when it was coming out in November of last year. Yeah, I'm the best at schedules and production, aren't I? It made a lot more sense when I was leading with a joke about how, oh, spooky season is over, why am I doing this? Whereas now I just have to get meta with it to let me sleep at night. I mean, regardless of timing, I do still have a thematic connection to the last video, which was about Pharasma, and there's nowhere else in the Inner Sea that worships her quite like Ustalav. So yeah, video about Ustalav. Let's go ahead and step right into our creepy carriage, take a ride through the dark woods, and get ourselves a room at the weird gothic castle as we take a nice long look at the Immortal Principality of Ustalav. Before we get started, I want to address this topic from a meta perspective. Pathfinder is a TTRPG setting. I'll give you a moment to process the shock. That means the world building has a fundamentally different assignment from, for example, a book or video game setting. And it also presents a unique challenge. See, with a book or video game or movie or any other property really, you'll have people that are fans of that work and will want to play in that world. So selling them on a game set in that world is pretty easy. The people who are buying the Cosmere RPG are doing so because they are Cosmere fans and want to play in the Cosmere world, not because they want to pull the mechanics for a game set in a completely disconnected world. For something like Pathfinder, things tend to get a little skewed in the opposite direction. Players can and do love the game for entirely mechanical reasons, ignoring the published lore in favor of their homebrew setting. And that's a great thing about this hobby, the amount of personal creativity you can bring to it. But the reason I do these videos at all is because the lore for this setting is really interesting. There's so much to see that you miss by just going, I'll homebrew my own thing instead of using this. I hope I can show you, through videos like this, just how incredible the Galarian setting is, so you can get as sucked into things as I am and have the same brainworms as me. And one of the best ways to nurture those brainworms is to distill something down to a quick, elevator pitch level summary, 1 or 2 sentences max. For example, Pharesia, the last region I did a video on, frontier dotted with ancient wizard ruins. If that hooks you, then you'll start to look closer and find out all about things like ancient Thassalon, the Rune Lords, their enduring legacy, and how it all echoes forward into the events of modern day. See what I mean? Quick hook, good line, now we're all sinkers. Ustalav is even simpler. Universal Horror Transylvania. Think of any classic movie monster, you can find it here. Except mummies, those stick to the desert. We don't have any hungry British shipping them off to London to join the Dark Universe crossover. But the rest of it, all fair game. If you saw Van Wolver Helsing fight it in that one movie, it's here. As well as some more general undead spooky gothic stuff, because why not? Oh, and a smattering of that HP seasoning, for flavor. But how did all that stuff get here? Well, let's take a look and find out for ourselves as we cover the history of Ustalav. A quick reminder that we're only covering the history of Ustalav up to 4707, when the timeline starts in Pathfinder 1st Edition. Things in this area have developed a lot in recent years with 2nd Edition, but that's all a story for another time. Additionally, since this is going to cover a lot of horror topics, I want to put a general content warning here. I won't be going into detail for anything, but some stuff you can't really talk about without skirting that line. A few places describe actions that, in real life, would be pretty atrocious war crimes, and at the timestamp currently on screen, there is a brief mention of pet death and someone taking their own life. I've tried to be considerate, but if I got anything wrong or you feel that something should be better tagged, please let me know and I'll add a warning to the chapters of the video. Thank you so much in advance for helping me out, Pathfinders. Ustalav is located in the northern central part of Avestan, on the north shore of Lake Incarthen. Not to be confused with the Inner Sea, which connects to the ocean, Lake Incarthen is strictly fresh water. It's the second largest lake on the continent, rivaled only by the Lake of Mists and Veils farther north. Now, the nation of Ustalav wasn't founded until 2361, which is fairly late in the timeline as far as these things go, but the region was by no means empty until then. Lakeside is a prime location for settlement since it provides so many valuable resources. Numerous Kelid and Varisian tribes made their home here, but we'll talk about them a little later. Let's go over a little geography before we get into the nation's full history. The map we have is Ustalav's modern borders, which, while obviously accurate now, don't represent the original borders, which have changed throughout history. Let's begin with the northern one. We don't know much about its history and how it might have shifted, but considering the nation of Sarkoris was founded roughly 1,000 years after Ustalav was, it's likely shifted quite a few times, though probably not too drastically. The current one is probably close enough. Right now, it follows the Mortre River to Lake Porphyria. That lake feeds into the West Selen River, which the eastern border follows down to the southern border. This is our first major deviation, as the original border extended farther south into what is currently the nation of Razmaran. On the west side, the border follows the Tusk mountain range to its southern end, jumping across the plains before following the Hungry Mountains. Similar to the opposite side, the southern border likely extended much farther, possibly all the way down to the southern border of Lastwall. This seems like a pretty drastic change, but as we get into the history of Ustalav, things will make a lot more sense. We start that history in 2361, when a man named Suevida Ustav united the nomadic Varisian tribes and drove out the Kelids in the area, creating a new nation for his people via conquest. He then paired conquest with its bestest buddy in the whole wide world, nepotism, dividing the country among his trusted lieutenants, family members, and closest allies. Of course, some parts of the new country were more coveted than others, and those that he harbored doubts about were given the less than ideal regions. This approach worked out well for him, but it has a built-in problem. Systems designed to function around one specific guy fall apart when that one specific guy dies, and break down even more as time goes on. And so, after a few generations, spats between great-grandfathers about apple-picking rights and whose farm grew the fatter pigs had festered into deep familial grudges. Before the Hatfields and the Capulets could tear the countryside apart in civil war, the current king, Kaldemov of House Ustav, solved the problem definitely forever in 4862 when he formally divided the country into 16 counties, each of which was given to a noble family. The families, given the title of Count or Countess, would be allowed to rule over their counties pretty much however they wanted, as long as they remained obedient to the crown, that is. And if you're familiar with any system of nobility, you know how easy it is to remain extremely loyal to the crown whenever anyone who checks up on that comes calling. Thus, Ustalav entered into an era of relative peace and prosperity for the next 600 years. Then everything went to absolute hell. In order to contextualize this, we need to step back in time to before the founding of Ustalav. The history for this time is kind of murky, likely as a result of the residents being nomadic and not writing a lot of stuff down. However, we do have records of a civilization being founded to the south, on an island in the middle of Lake Incarthen. It was settled by Kelids moving north from Druma, which was controlled by the Dwarven Empire of Tartargath at the time. Druma was heavily exploited by the Empire, and many fled to avoid that oppression. The specific humans here settled on Intreper Isle, the only known island in Lake Incarthen. The first settlement was founded in -3840, and by the year -2301, the various villages had united into a small kingdom. We don't know the name of this kingdom, but we do know their capital was called Castrilion. The nation prospered, having periods of expansion that eventually brought them into contact with the Kelid tribes in the area, but what expands must contract eventually, and over time, skirmishes and border disputes would wear away at this nation, and by -355 they had ceded most of their territory, pulling back to just the areas surrounding the lake. Now you're probably wondering what any of this has to do with Ustalav, and I promise we're getting there, don't worry. Now, on the north shore of Lake Incarthen, a man was born in 837. We don't know anything about his early life. Was he born in a city or in a wilderness shack? To noble parents or struggling peasants? We don't know and never will know, because all of that crumbles in the face of what he has become. This man excelled at arcane magic, and specifically at necromancy. He amassed incredible power, and at the age of 24, he conquered the city of Castrilion, taking its wealth and people for himself. He then entrenched his forces upon the Isle, turning it into the heart of his dark dictatorship. This man was Tar-Baphon, the Whispering Tyrant, and his rise to power would mark a change for Intreper Isle. It was now and forever the Isle of Terror. Tar-Baphon would commit many terrible acts for the remainder of his mortal life, from siphoning great magical power from a Thessalonian monument known as the Cenotaph to the defeat of the great dragon Karamoros, whose spirit he broke with the reanimated bodies of her children. Her defeat was pivotal, for her lair was at the center of the Isle of Terror. Within that lair was a strange planar thinness that Tar-Baphon exploited for his own ends, tearing open a rift into the void and creating a site known as the Wizard King's Pit. He would use his magical might to create an army of undead, united with the nearby orcs of Belkzen to threaten all of Avestan. Tar-Baphon had great grand plans, the kind that ended with his own ascension into divinity, and he would fuel that ascension with the blood of a man he despised, Eredin. Tar-Baphon hated the last Aslanti, both for the divinity he achieved and for how he achieved it. In Tar-Baphon's mind, Aroden cheated with the Starstone, unable to become a god with his own power. The tyrant was very vocal in this hatred, calling out the pretender god to come down and see what a real powerful human looks like. The goal was to lure the last Aslanti into a trap on the Isle of Terror, which would be the god's undoing. In 896, Aroden finally descended, but was not caught unaware. Instead, he and Tar-Baphon clashed, and Aroden slew the Wizard King in battle, god smiting mortal like rock destroys scissors. Aroden then buried the fool on the island, marking an end to the arrogant, overblown tyrant. All according to plan. The most powerful form a necromancer can ascend to is that of a lich, a creature of unparalleled spellcasting might. Achieving this form is tricky though. It requires removing your soul and placing it into a vessel that will house it for the rest of your no longer a life. This vessel is not something you can just pick up at the store or create with a standard ritual. It must be unique to your individual soul. Therefore, the process is more of an art than a science. It's an expression of how the caster views magic and is incredibly risky. Most liches fail to become liches, but the more you're willing to risk, the more powerful a result you can achieve. And Tar-Baphon was willing to take the biggest risk. Aroden killing him wasn't a failure of his plan, it was a factor in his transformation. After all, to become a lich, you do have to die and return, and what stronger form of death is there than having a god smite you? And how much grander is your return when you come back to life from that? Both of those are pretty magically significant. 1 year after Aroden killed him, Tar-Baphon's followers dug the king up and relocated his corpse, burying him in Ustalav's soil. Time slowly passed as Tar-Baphon's soul made its way back to his prepared vessel and began the process of rebuilding. 2,307 years later, in 3203 Absalom Reckoning, the Whispering Tyrant was reborn. And he started exactly where he'd left off, raising another undead army and once again uniting the orcs of Belkzen into the living side of his forces, preparing for conquest. The opening shot was taken by one of his many powerful servants, a necromancer named Socorro. The vile man led an uprising in the town of Carrion Hill, located in eastern Ustalav, slaughtering thousands in his master's name and earning the epithet the Butcher of Carrion Hill. While the nation of Ustalav was caught off guard, they weren't going to just roll over and die to a tide of orcs and undead. The ruling family, the Virholts, wasted no time. They sent out Prince Ardurus II, son of King Ardurus, to defeat this deadly foe. With him he carried Corpse Light, a powerful sword capable of completely destroying the undead, cutting down the unholy with a single strike. With this great artifact in his hand, surely the prince would prevail, bringing peace and prosperity to— oh crap, he's dead. Well, surely the sword will prove to be a great boon to whoever picks it up next, and it was lost with the prince's remains, still unfound to this day. Crap baskets. Okay, that's bad, but things are salvageable. In 3205, the army officially teamed up with the Church of Pharasma to launch an offensive against the Whispering Tyrant. The head of this operation was another prince of Ustalav, Admondius Virholt, bearing an even more powerful weapon, the minor artifact Raven's Head. This enchanted mace was especially powerful against the undead, and bolstered a cleric's ability to combat them, doubly so when it's a cleric of Pharasma. This synergy between weapon and wielder would be exactly the thing Ustalav would need to strike back, and crap, he's also dead. And his weapon was also lost, never to be found again. Having run out of legitimate children with holy artifacts to throw at the Whispering Tyrant, King Ardurus decided that, well, any kid'll do in a pinch, and so entrusted the defense of the nation to his bastard son, Andridas, giving him a turn to take a crack at this. Realizing that his dad was just throwing children at the problem, or perhaps just not wanting to launch a direct assault against a force that had killed 2 other princes with powerful holy artifacts. Side note, thanks for not saving a third one for me, Dad, really upping my success chances. Andridas fled into the countryside, where he engaged in a more clandestine war. He made some kind of deal with a group of Xarni, the exact terms of which are unknown. We do know that these Varisians were also lycanthropes, and that the result is a tribe called the Prince's Wolves. They fought the Whispering Tyrant's forces within the Shadowed Woods of Ustalav for centuries, and some say they still stalk the woodlands to this day. As for the active fight against Tar-Baphon, King Ardurus no longer had any children to throw at the problem, so he was forced to throw himself at it. And we can see from him exactly where his sons got their tactical acumen, as county after county fell to the Whispering Tyrant. This would culminate in 3206 at the Battle of Dawnmarsh, where King Ardurus would meet his end. His corpse would be revived as an undead abomination called the Shrieking Sovereign and be forced to march at the head of Tar-Baphon's forces. He led them into the capital of Ustalav, where he would climb to the highest palace tower and hang himself. The sight of their king, dead and undying, screaming from the halls of power, broke what little resolve remained in the country. Ustalav had fallen, What remained was a nation of slaves to an undead monster. For the next 600 years, Ustalav's history would be lost under the grindstone of Tar-Baphon. The Lich used the nation as his capital and staging ground, slowly overtaking much of central Avestan. Things are so muddied that we only know of one historical event in Ustalav prior to the start of the Shining Crusade. It happened in 3220 and involved vampires. The undead are often seen as united in a battle against the living, but this could not be further from the truth. Most of this comes from the illusion of unity created by undead with no will of their own, like zombies and skeletons. Among the stronger undead, who maintain their personality and hungers, there's a lot more division. Now, tyrants don't like division, or the presence of any kind of power not under their control, so something would need to be done about all of that. So one of Tar-Baphon's vampire lieutenants, Malyas, was sent to clean things up. The blood drought starved or drove out any of the disloyal vampires they could find, forcing any dissidents to hide in Ustalav's deepest shadows. A small group was able to evade detection and wage their own isolated shadow war, but their contributions to the overall fight against the Whispering Tyrant were minimal. The real resistance took the form of the Shining Crusade, a topic that deserves its own video. Ustalav is sadly a footnote in the history of their own liberation. Here's the Cliff Notes version of what went down. Tar-Baphon turned the old Ustalav capital of Atarak into his evil stronghold of Gallowspire. A combined force of Taldor's army, the Dwarves of Kragadan, and the Knights of Ozem would launch an offensive in 3754, and over the next 70-ish years, drive the tyrant back. Tar-Baphon's downfall would come both at and in his own hand. In what would be the final battle of the war, he faced off against General Arnesant of Taldor, who was wielding a powerful artifact called the Shield of Eredin. Wanting to win the fight in one decisive and demoralizing swoop, Tar-Baphon used his powerful magic to make a wish, teleporting the heart directly from Arnesant's chest into his waiting palm, ready for the crushing. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for us, the Shield of Eredin was designed to sacrifice itself to save its wielder. Instead of a bloody heart, Tar-Baphon found a shard of sanctified wood embedded in his hand. This was, in my opinion as a technical scholar of magical interactions, very bad. Like sodium dropped into water bad. Tar-Baphon fled into the depths of Gallowspire, both to recover and to find a way to remove this shard from his hand. Now the Shining Crusade would have loved to just destroy him for good, but he's a lich, meaning that if he dies while his soul jar is intact, he just reforms around it. And his soul jar was magically hidden by the goddess Urgathoa so effectively that not even other gods can find it. Since they lacked a means to destroy the Lich permanently, the Crusaders settled on the old fantasy standby of seal it up and hope no one ever opens the door again. This plan always works great. Here, I even phoned up my friend Luz Theron Telemon to confirm for me. Oh, sorry, hold on. Sounds like he's busy with his wife or something? I'm sure he'll get back to me. To keep the seal in place, 3 smaller seals were created to anchor the greater seal, and each was given out to one of the forces responsible for fighting the Shining Crusade. So Taldor got one, the dwarves got the second, and the last was given to the Knights of Ozem, who remained behind to guard Gallowspire and prevent the Whispering Tyrant's return. The area that was once southern Ustalav became a Taldane protectorate named Lastwall, which would later become its own nation when the Taldor Empire started falling apart, as empires tend to do. All of that's a story for another time. Let's get back to Ustalav, which is not looking so hot after all this. 3827 marks the end of the Shining Crusade and the return of Ustalav to its living inhabitants. But the thing about 600 years of undead tyranny is that it's not like a wet coat. You can't just shrug it off, grab a hot shower, and feel better in about 20 minutes. You have some generational trauma to start working through. Doubly so because, as horrible as the undead tyrant government was, they were still, your government, and with them fallen, you have to figure out just who the hell is delivering all the mail and collecting all the taxes. So the first order of business is the classic sound off if you're not dead, aka a census. The purpose of this was not just to figure out how many people were left alive, though that was important, but also figure out if any of the noble lines had surviving heirs. The whole process took roughly 2 years, during which time Ustalav's people did their best to just take a breath. The nation had undergone a horrible shared tragedy, and as often happens, many turned to faith in a higher power to help them cope with that. Pharasma was the goddess of choice this time around, and that's a pretty easy pick. She hates the undead, so do the people of Ustalav. They worry about their bodies being risen after they perish and damning their souls to torment. She protects those souls and ushers them to their final resting place. It's a match made in the boneyard. But as the country recovered, something new was beginning to appear on the shores of Lake Devirmus, a group known as the Pharasman Penitents, led by a prophet named Mother Kavapesta, also known as Sister Sorrow. The philosophy of the Penitents is actually pretty simple, and you can see how it would become popular in Ustalav following the tyrant's defeat. It says that the actions you take in life must be balanced out through pain, trials, and tribulations, which add a metaphysical weight to your soul during the judgment process. Thus, by enduring suffering in this life, you gain a greater standing in the next one. Now, you might remember from the Pharasma video that I said this isn't really true. Pharasma's judgment is a sorting, not a punishment or reward. So what is going on here? Are these people just following a completely off-base cult? Well, not exactly. Pharasma judges a person's actions, how those actions affect that person's soul, and then determines where they go based on that. And dedicating your life to a philosophy that valorizes sacrifice, enduring suffering, and delaying gratification sounds very similar to the ideals aligned with some of the nicer upper planes. Specifically heaven and nirvana, but Elysium can have a few as a treat. But that does mean you've spent your time worshipping a goddess whose realm you won't actually be going to? If there's one that would be fine with that, it's Pharasma. Anyway, weren't we talking about a census? Right, yes we were, and that census was complete in 3834. Along with counting all the normal people that managed to stay alive, good for them, 2 nobles were also confirmed to have survived, Andredos Odranti and Sasagia Calavaso. Somehow, a decision was made, and Andredos Odranti was crowned the Prince of the Immortal Principalities of Ustalav. No idea how that pick was made. I'm guessing coin flip, but I'm hoping high stakes game of tag. The bigger question I have is why they didn't just have the 2 marry and avoid any kind of issue with this, since my limited understanding of noble families is that when one doesn't get picked to be king, they tend to get a little vindictive about things. Oh hey look, my hand is making a shadow as I hold up these 4 fingers, I wonder what that's about. Odranti would establish a new capital in Ardis, while the Countess Calavaso would head south to the shores of Lake Encarthen to refound the city of Califas. Which makes for a good transition to talk about Ustalav's counties now that the borders are settled into their modern-day spots. Originally, there were 16 counties whose borders we're not entirely clear on. We also don't know all of their names. One was completely lost to time. If I had to make a guess, this county was probably somewhere down south in what is now Lastwall, mostly because that's the only place I can put it in. Of the remaining 15, 2 were so completely destroyed by the Whispering Tyrant they are still considered a no-man's land. They were the counties of Virholt and Grodlich, but today they are combined into the territory of Virlich, which is not technically a county, but is still labeled on the map as part of Ustalav. If I had to guess at the original borders, I'd say this river that runs through the mountains works as a natural boundary, so it's as good as anything else. The last, no longer a county, Genoit, would have been south of the border, likely on the eastern part of Avalon Bay. But by the time Ustalav was refounded, the territory was in the de facto control of the Archduchy of Melkat, one of the river kingdoms that borders Ustalav. Given the sparse population, Ustalav basically went, fine, if you want it, you can have it. We'll find out what's going on with that in a few hundred years. But with all of this done, we have 12 remaining counties of Ustalav, with Virlich territory bringing us to lucky 13. How wonderful. Back to history. You might remember that the Whispering Tyrant's army consisted of 2 main forces, a big pile of undead, and the orcs of Belkzen. Now, the undead half of the army was loyal mostly by technicality. 98% of them were magically compelled to follow orders and couldn't disobey. The orc half was much more mercenary, though by the later point in the war those still part of Tarbafon's side were very deep in the sunk cost fallacy. That and the Whispering Tyrant tended to take resignation from the living half of the army as signing up for the dead half of the army. Between that and the wizards' frankly poor tactical decisions, the orc forces were pretty firmly routed back to Belkzen after the war. Unfortunately for Ustalav, that state didn't last very long, and in 3859 the western borders of the nation once again came under regular raids. Now Ustalav has 4 counties that border Belkzen, but 3 of them aren't really viable targets. Virlich isn't even really a county, and it's full of undead, so nothing worth going after there. Meanwhile, both Violent and Lazari are protected by the Tusk Mountains, making them much harder to get into. Not impossible, orc raiders are very capable of traversing the mountains, but even they would much prefer the path of least resistance. Which is why the county of Tamravenna, also known as Canterwall in the modern day, became the main target for raiders. Attacks ground away at the territory for a few hundred years until someone got desperate enough to do something very stupid. In 4042, Count Ondaatje prayed to Zon Cathan for a champion to save his people, and the Midnight Lord responded. You do not want the Midnight Lord to respond to your prayers, because his answers are always more painful than silence. The warlord Kazavan arrived and swiftly took charge of a brutal military campaign that drove the orcs from Ustalav. However, he then pulled a switcheroo by claiming the liberated lands as his own, building a castle named Scarwall, and making plans for conquest in the name of his dark god. Realizing how badly he'd messed up 9 years and 1 prayer too late, Count Ondaatje wrote out in 4051 to bring Kazavan to justice. He did a very poor job of this, so poor that he and his army all died about it, with Ondaatje's execution being particularly brutal. put a pin in all these events, we're going to come back to them after we cover some other relevant history. Sliding back in time a bit, remember that vampiric shadow war? Well, turns out the opposition won the long game on a technicality, but an Ustalav finally free of undead tyranny wasn't exactly going to be welcoming to anyone with a body temperature condition, so victory was more of a lateral move for them, requiring continued secrecy and hiding. But as I'm sure you're all aware, vampires have a pretty critical need for blood. And putting aside the question of whether they can survive on animal blood, it's important to remember that vampires themselves are humanoids. They come from, and largely feel they still belong to, humanoid society. Undead they may be, they still seek to live, as it were, to indulge in the excesses now allowed by their new state. Basically, they don't want to go live in the woods sucking blood from deer like ticks. So in 3866, the leader of Ustalav's vampires, Luvik Servaj, moved the majority of their population to ancient ruins hidden beneath Caliphas. That city was growing, and a higher population makes keeping vampires well fed but secret much easier, and a concentrated population is easier to rule and keep track of. So moving the vampires here was a win-win. You know, apropos of nothing, that guy's name kinda sounds a little ironic, right? Luvik? No, Isaac. Though I do have it on good authority that vampires would in fact scrape and lick. Scrape and lick. Scrape and Anyway, in 3879, Mother Cavapesta departed this world for Pharasma's judgment. Her followers began construction of a cathedral, named a town after her, and renamed the entire Lake de Virmus into Lake Cavapesta. I'm surprised they didn't try to get a local sauce renamed into Lady Cavapesto in her honor too. Like, I get it, you had a lot of respect for her, the lady doesn't need everything named after her. In unrelated Pharasman news, a monastery named the Monastery of the Veil was founded in the county of Ulkazar. It's staffed by an order of hermetic monks, detached from the outside world. Keep this place in mind for later, they're going to come up again. Finally, one more bit of foundational news, the city of Lepidstadt was founded in 3898. Good for them. Alright, time to get weird. In 3988, a man by the name of Aldous Alden Cantor returned to Ustalav after having spent some time exploring the continent of Grund. He'd actually been gone for so long that people thought him lost in the deserts of Assyrian back in 3985. But his return put those grisly rumors to rest. He replaced those rumors with a fantastic and nearly unbelievable tale. He claimed to have spent time with a secretive group of immortal sages who maintained a connection to the fallen angel Tabris. You might remember that name from the Pharasma video. Tabris was an angel who wandered the plains, collecting information into 3 powerful books, the Chronicles of the Righteous, the Book of the Damned, and the Concordance of Rivals. Aldous claimed to have connected with the fallen angel and learned many esoteric secrets about the universe. And now that he's back in Ustalav, the Count of Violin will teach you everything he's learned for the low price of 1 small fortune. Despite sounding like a rug pull waiting to collapse in on itself, Aldous could actually back up his claims. The things he taught did have power behind them, and within a year his collection of rich friends had grown into an actual organization, the Esoteric Order of the Palatine Eye. The heart of their order was a document called the Lost Gospel of Tabris. Penned by Aldous himself, the Lost Gospels are dense, rambling, and, as befits the organization's name, highly esoteric. Imagine you're trying to read a story told through a series of interconnected blog posts, but each post can only be found by playing an ARG to decode the URL for that page, and then you need to play a separate ARG involving those blog posts to figure out the order you need to read them in, which isn't posting order or chronological order, but a secret third worse option. Again, despite this sounding like a convoluted scam cooked up by a formerly rich idiot in desperate need of $1,000 by any means necessary, Aldous was genuine with his writings. Unfortunately, he was also going just the littlest bit completely insane. The entire organization nearly collapsed when, in 3999, an angry mob of villagers broke up what was described as a midnight orgiastic rite at a set of standing stones called the Spiral Cromlech. What this rite was meant to do, no one knows. It was halted before completion. Some of those present did speak of what looked like a celestial about to be sacrificed, but descriptions are not consistent. What is well known is that when the leader of this rite was unmasked, it was revealed to be Aldous. That obliterated his reputation, and he was forced to relinquish his title to his cousin Oberyn Imarin. But while Aldous was disgraced, his friends and students still believed in him, and the order persisted despite circumstances. It was in for a few rough years, as Aldous' deteriorating mental state meant the group was bleeding members faster than it was gaining them. But that problem solved itself when, in 4028, Aldous disappeared under strange and mysterious circumstances. He has not been seen since. You'd think that would collapse the whole house of cards, but Aldous' 9 most devoted students went, well, nothing to do about it. He'll turn up if he needs us, probably. Took up the slack and continued the organization, rebranding with the new catchphrase, now 100% weird orgy guy free. These new leaders, the Elect of Nine, opened up membership to a lot more people. Previously, it was very a selective process, but now anyone interested could make their case for an invite. Most of the screening questions were things like, can you pay membership dues? And can you pay membership dues consistently? And will you pay membership dues right now? But while all this makes the esoteric Order of the Palatine Eye out to be like a bunch of rich kids LARPing as Osirian mystics, their order has actually managed to discover important secrets and do a lot of good in the world. Which brings us very roundaboutly all the way back to Kazavan and his terrible, horrible, no good, very bad castle. In 4063, the Order, along with the champion of Lastwall named Mandrivis and his various companions, managed to defeat the horrible warlord, and in doing so expose his secret. That secret being that Kazavan was actually an ancient dragon. The rest of his story is something I went over in my whole Curse of the Crimson Throne video series, so go ahead and watch like all 5 to 6 hours of that if you want more context. After this, Kazavan is no longer relevant to Ustalav's story. Returning to random events from across history, in 4144, the Countess of Ulcazar had a problem. See, she had some children. And I mean had in the used to possess sense. They all died, and it was the fault of the monks of the Monastery of Silence. At least to her it was. Her children were stricken with a cursed plague called the Withers, which was spreading through Ustalav at the time. Desperate for help, she sent word to the monks, begging for assistance from the Order. But they did not respond. When she traveled with her children in person, the group was turned away. The monks, quote, lived only for death. The Countess was less than pleased with this answer. As her children lay dead on the steps, she vowed revenge. And oh, did she get revenge. It would take time, but eventually she gained the favor of the cult of Norgorber and used the Blackfinger's killers to slaughter the Pharasman monks. The assassins replaced the Pharasmans and remain there to this day. To the outside world, the Order never changed, but to those in the know, here they can find the silent killers of secrets and Aphexia. Well, that's a downer. You know what Ustalav needs? A good tradition, something that comes around every generation or so people can celebrate together. And apparently the people of Castle Arudora thought they would start up a really nice one. The origins of this situation are, as is often the case, mysterious. Seriously, this entire county is built on gothic horror vibes. Mystery is kind of a part of the whole package. It begins with rumors of a cloaked figure approaching the castle one night in 4213 and being allowed inside by a scullery maid. Why she did this, we don't know, but further rumors say the figure she welcomed bore a resemblance to the family's founding patriarch, the holy champion Erigale Arudora. Regardless of who it was, they were carrying a mysterious bundle with him, one that looked strangely child-sized. The next day, the curse began. It started with 7 messengers who rode out from the castle seeking various distant family members, beckoning them home. Why they were sent out, we don't know, but following that, an unknown but likely brief time later, a black carriage rode across the bridge. The nearby town of Mycerine suffered in the immediate aftermath, as the dead bodies of the castle's servants crawled into the streets and started taking victims. The residents tried to fight back, even destroying the bridge leading to the castle, but it didn't matter. A ghostly replacement simply sprang up to take its place. Soon enough, everyone had either died or perished, leaving only the rising mists of the nearby lake to keep the castle company. Now the place has taken on a new name, Bastard Hall. No one and nothing emerges from the mist except for the Black Coach, which rides out once a century to gather more victims? Sacrifices? No one knows what the coach wants or why it takes people. The actions are as mysterious as the motivations. When the Black Coach emerges, it seeks out 7 individuals and asks them to ride with it. They will be taken to Bastard Hall, and none who've accepted have been seen since. If you refuse, the coach will close its doors and depart, leaving you alone, for exactly 1 week. Then it shall return, and it will no longer be asking. Why would it give people 1 week to let them get their affairs in order? Maybe? But it's still gonna kidnap them, so no idea. The coach does maintain a consistent pattern, emerging every 100 years. The first ride was in 4213, and the second in 4313. By 4413, that constituted enough of an established pattern for people to want to do something about it. A peasant army stormed the castle and burned the entire place to the ground, presumably killing everyone they found inside. Whatever they did, it didn't amount to much, because in 4513 the entire castle just reappeared, even sporting a few new towers, since I guess whatever is doing this decided to get some construction in while the server was down for maintenance. A second castle destruction was attempted in 4613, but it went much worse, with a lot more people dying. Will the coach ride forth in 4713? Spoilers, actually no. For some reason it just never showed up, and as I was scripting this video, a new adventure set in Bastard Hall was announced, so hopefully we'll get an answer. We do know that apparently someone new is now in control of it as they approached in 4711, but details are scarce. Still, spooky as hell, right? Always good to have a macabre mystery menacing the many mundane multitudes. We've only got a few more years until we reach the modern day, but the last few hundred are always the most packed, so we better get moving again. In 4249, Kavapesta, the city, suffered under a plague named the Black Breath. The people of Kavapesta likely could have survived better had they chosen to quarantine or else flee from the infected area, but few did. Instead, the people here kind of viewed diseases as a test from Pharasma, one that will call those whose time it was to go and spare those who fate would allow to live. If it was me, I'd say fate's desire would be to do the practical thing and leave Plague Town, but I'm not an oracle, so... In 4288, we saw the city of Caliphos launch a crusade against the hidden vampire population living below ground. This was spurred on by the actions of said vampires, who'd become far more brazen and less careful as the years went on. Their leader, Luvic very silly name Servage, basically grabbed anyone who wasn't stupid enough to have already gotten themselves hunted down, went, "Seriously guys, do you know what the word subtle means?" and then pulled them deeper into the tunnels. They are still down there, having gone far enough to ground to avoid complete extermination, but hopefully living a less decadent life. Now 4399 brings us a very weird one, courtesy of our old friend Aldous Cantor. On New Year's Eve, just before the big 4400, his old home of Cantor House caught fire. That's not great, but not the most notable thing either. Sometimes houses just catch fire. What is notable is the giant egg-shaped stone monument that was apparently hidden inside the house the entire time. Important to point out, Cantor House had not been abandoned, but most of the people living there claimed to know nothing about the big stone egg. You'd think a 33-foot tall rock would be hard to hide. Also, weird coincidence, that big orgy ritual that Cantor was caught was also happening on the eve of a new year. Probably nothing. 4422 is actually a very important year for Ustalav, as it marks the founding of a new institution. Lyrian and Katamon Treus were two brothers, of a very grim persuasion and with at least some interest in the supernatural. They investigated a strange monument in the county of Violin, called Calyx Court. Also called the Vault of the Witch Priests, this ancient Kelid burial ground was unfortunately destroyed by the brothers in the course of their investigation. But they came out of the whole experience with a lot of ancient relics and items that needed a place for study and experimentation. Given they also had a good bit of money from adventuring, the two decided to open a university in Lepidstadt. We'll go over the university more in the breakdown of each region, but trust me, they are getting up to some weird stuff there. In the year 4521, a horrible tragedy occurred. Count Ristomar Tyriak was a beloved darling of the people. Things were honestly going great for him. His father had peacefully passed leadership of the Varno County down to him, a horrible vampire menacing his people had been captured and staked in his castle, and he'd soon be marrying the love of his life, Iltanya Arsbeta. Then his coach was attacked by brigands while traveling, and blasted off the side of the road into a ravine. Impaled with a wooden stake and barely awake, the Count fought bravely against his attackers, but fell unconscious after some time. Family servants discovered his beaten body, barely clinging to life, and hurriedly returned him to the castle, desperate to save him. They were not succeeding very well, and desperate times call for desperate measures. An elderly woman serving as the castle's housemother, Radiah, had an idea. A horrible long shot of an idea built on Varisian superstition. Staked and bound in the castle was the vampire Baruso, a feral monster who had taken many lives and recently been caught and brought in. Why he wasn't killed outright I have no idea, but Radiah thought she could use him. She had the vampire brought to the Count and carefully unbound, just enough to let him work. The plan was kind of convoluted, but I think it was this. Have the vampire begin turning the Count, who was already on the last pixel of his health bar at the time. Then, right as it's about to finish, Radiah would interrupt the process by restaking the vampire. Finally, she'd spend the next 13 nights in solemn prayer, so that when the Count rose once more, it would be with his true human soul returned, fully restored to life, rather than just creating a new vampire. This did not work. Count Tyriak arose as an undead monstrosity, and he was horrified. He was furious, and he was desperate. Everything was going horribly wrong. He needed something to ground him, and there was one hope. All of this, in time, could be fixed with the right help. He just needed to fetch Iltanya, see her safe and sound once more, and then he and his new wife would find a way through this together. Iltanya's body had never been found. Everyone in the castle perished in a blood haze. All that remained was the Count and the ghost of Radiah, who would serve even in death as penance for her transgressions. When the killing ended, Ristomar waited for the sun atop the highest tower, ready to be burned away for his sins. It was Radiah again who stopped him, telling the Count that his unholy condition and the murderous rampage would condemn his soul to the pits of hell, beyond any hope of reuniting with his love. Unable to bear the idea, the Count fled into the wilderness, searching for any source of information on Iltania. Nothing ever surfaced. Though initially mad with grief, Time slowly returned his sanity. One thought just kept coming up over and over again across the years. Vampirism acts like a disease, and a disease can be cured. He could be cured. He would be cured, because only then would he have any chance of seeing Iltania again. Count Tyriak returned to Varno, posing as his own distant cousin, and took over the county seat again. Ever since, he's remained as a distant ruler, using proxies at court and constantly traveling. Actually running the county is a secondary concern. The only thing that really matters is finding a cure, so the Count Ristamar Tyriak can die as a mortal man. As of now, he has not succeeded. By the way, if you watch the Curse of the Crimson Throne videos, he actually has a connection to something in that AP. Sound off in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. Interested to see who catches it. Now, Ustalav can't just be all tragedy all the time. There has to be at least a few positive things going on. For instance, the Sinkomakti School of Sciences was founded in Rosenport in 4570, giving Ustalav a second major university for people to study sciences in a world of magic. This creates an interesting bit of contrast for the region. Ustalav is a place of old horror where superstition and rumors hold sway, but also a place where new science and logic are being studied, taking the place of occult mysticism. But in a world where magic is real, the overall result is a unique and interesting blend of the two. Especially because occult magic specifically is based in part on the interaction between the logical understanding of the world and the emotional truths of the people who experience it. Being a scientist doesn't disprove this branch of magic, it actually kind of empowers it. Okay, last little bit of history before we hit the Age of Lost Omens. I'm hoping for a good one, and it's a serial killer. Yay. In 4588, within the city of Caliphas, a dead body was found completely bisected. Over the next few months, 4 more bodies would be discovered. These killings would be the first in a long line of deaths attributed to one Dr. D. Notes would be found near the bodies, speaking of a grand heroic work and cutting away the sickness from people across the land. Very original of you, Dr. Hannibal Dexter. Unfortunately for people that don't want to be randomly ended in an alleyway, Dr. D has continued his work into the modern day, having never been caught. It's unknown if the killer is a mantle taken up by multiple people, one incredibly long-lived individual, or some other supernatural explanation. Who or whatever they are, the not-so-good doctor is quite adept at getting away. We now come to the death of Eredin, which is very important for a lot of reasons across the world, but more specifically, it's important here because Ustalav shared a border with Sarkoris. And when Eredin died, Sarkoris exploded with demons. Hate it when that happens, you never want to explode with demons. Now, Ustalav did not handle the World Wound opening all that well. More specifically, they didn't really handle it at all. The initial assault from the outer rifts was mostly limited to Sarkoris, and Ustalav didn't see the need to get involved. This is a short-sighted approach, as while the World Wound was beatable long-term, the demons were pretty much guaranteed to win the initial assault. The open portal gave them functionally infinite resources, and a much easier time deploying their heavy hitters. The people of Sarkoris fought bravely, many stepping up to defend their home, but the average citizen of any nation is not equipped to take on 99% of demons, and survival is often the better part of valor, which means most of the population started fleeing to safety. The people of Sarkoris didn't have a lot of choices on where to flee. North was the Arctic Circle, not known for its ease of survival. West was the realm of the Mammoth Lords, slightly easier but full of rival tribes with big angry elephants. East was Mendev, one of the better options, but since the World Wound opened in central Sarkoris, not viable for a lot of people. Numeria was plausible, but quite the gamble, what with the robots and lasers and such. So lastly, we look south. I'm ruling out Belkzen entirely, as even without the orcs, that requires crossing the Tusk Mountains. Only Ustalav remained, and while there was animosity between the two nations, between humans and demons, it's so much easier to pick the humans than the monsters. If only the humans made it so easy. Ustalav has 4 counties along the northern border with Sarkoris. One of them, Ordranto, was the homeland of the current princess of Ustalav, Maret Ordranti. She looked at a group of refugees fleeing for their lives and desperate for survival and gathered every ounce of empathy she could muster. So she could throw it out the window and condemn the Sarkorans as demonically tainted invaders threatening her home. What followed would go down in Ustalav's history as the Demon Skin War, which is a pretty grand name for what happened. It's not the word I would use to describe the slaughter of fleeing civilians, but the word I would use would likely make certain algorithms very mad at me, so I'm just gonna leave it implied. From here on, Ustalav would largely stay out of the conflict, leaving the fight to the Mendevian Crusaders. They had their own problem to deal with, like the circus! That's right, in 4638, a traveling circus called the Carnival Cosmopolis arrived in the city of Ardis to set up shop. It has, to this date, never left. Perhaps they remained for some sinister reason, working on a dark plot in the shadows? Or maybe they're just doing good business here. Not everything has to be evil. Now, in 4662, Ustalav had another issue along its border, but not the northern one. This time we turn south, where the country borders the Archduchy of Melkat. See, there was a hot new craze sweeping that nation, a craze called utter devotion to the living god Razmir. It swept so hard that he became the new ruler and renamed the country into Razmaran. What a wacky and fun thing to do. So wacky and fun that the government priests started coming into Ustalav and telling them all about the great fun time you could have worshipping Razmir. Ustalav was not convinced. They banned the worship of Razmir throughout the country in retaliation. As a living god, Razmir isn't going to let a little thing like that stop him. After all, worship is mandatory, and if you don't want to show up for us, we'll come for you. In 4669, several missionary forces seized some land in southern Ustalav, specifically in Varno. Varno, you'll recall, is the county run by Count Vampy McBloodslorper. Being forced to pay attention to his county for a minute proved to be too annoying to bother with, so he just let the missionaries have the area. However, this wasn't a surrender, it was more relabeling a section of the grocery store. Dozens of drained corpses do a great job cutting down on missionary populations. Now, the rest of Ustalav might have been concerned about all this, but they were distracted by a much bigger political upheaval happening at the time. It started in 4670, in the county of Lazari, where weak leaders and petty decisions on the part of the aristocracy sparked a fierce but surprisingly bloodless revolution throughout Canterwald, Lazari, and Vineland. The local counts were forced out of power and replaced with a representative government. Collectively, these regions would be called the Palatinates. Normally, this kind of revolution would lead to a civil war, or at least massive tension between the counties, but the Palatinates maintained cohesion with the rest of the nation by swearing loyalty towards Ustalav's royal family. After all, the counts already hold near universal power within their own county while still being loyal to the crown, so why would our representatives really be that different? They're just alternative counts. This means that modern-day Ustalav can be divided into three distinct regions. Verlich is its own sort of no-man's land, the small Palatinates in the northwest, and the rest of the country would be collectively called Soivoda, based on the first name of the nation's founder. And weirdly enough, a revolution that overthrew the nobles of three counties would be the least of the country's political concerns. To understand what happened next, we need to slip back in time a little bit to 4665. The ruler of Barstoy, Count Verais, died without an heir. This meant that Prince Vladislav Ordrante needed to appoint a new noble to oversee the region. Problem was, Barstoy kinda sucks. It was a fallow backwater that nobody wanted to rule because it produced very little. So it was really strange when Arachne Neska, a lesser noble from Versix, approached the prince with an offer. Make him the provisional governor of the county for 3 years, and in that time he would wring a profit out of the place come hell or high water. Since no one else wanted the job, the prince agreed. Neska had already amassed a fortune as a tin mogul prior to taking the position, and he used that wealth to fund several social programs, attracting workers from all across Ustalav. Mercenaries cleared out the various roaming monsters, allowing laborers to begin construction and survey work. Surveys that revealed massive amounts of buried salt, starting up a very lucrative mining industry. Neska's plan was a massive success, and 4 months before the end of his tenure, he was officially made the new Count of Barstoy. And that brings us to a weird issue I found looking into this. My primary source for this video is Rule of Fear, the campaign setting book that details Ustalav, and that book states that noted horrible person Princess Meret Ordrante is the one who granted Neska the title, except all of the sources I found state that she's been dead for about a decade. And this isn't the usual, oh, I died and just pretended to be alive because of horror reasons that you might expect from Ustalav. Like, she just passed away and was buried dead. Plus, remember, it was Prince Vladislav that agreed to the deal with Neska in the first place? And I checked to make sure this wasn't like a husband and wife or mother and son co-ruling kind of thing. Meret is Vladislav's mother and again, confirmed dead for quite a while. I don't know if this was a miscommunication or a mistake, but the likely truth is that it was a misprint and Prince Vladislav is actually the one that gave Neska the title. Okay, tangent over, back to our main plot. All that land development and prosperity stuff sounds great, and on paper, it is. However, it's all going to get messy when paired with our next events. These also involve Prince Vladislav very briefly, or maybe they involve him forever. I'm not sure how that works when the event is your death. Sound off in the comments, I guess. Before he kicked it, Vladislav was fairly unpopular throughout Ustalav, making several strange decisions, including moving the capital of the country from Ardis down to Kalifas in 4674. And then he died. Officially, it was an unknown illness, which is often the royal term for the common diseases of discreet poisoning and/or 17 knife stabs while sleeping. And of course, the prince died without an heir. His lack of heir-making was so well known that the people of Ustalav had taken to calling him the eunuch prince, referencing both his weak rule and his lack of seed-sowing. The prince's brother, Edward Ardranti III, ascended to the throne, though he is not at all prepared for this. Edward is more of a military man, who likes to ride out and get things done, and doesn't really understand or appreciate the subtle manipulations that occur in politics. Man's so straight-laced he can't even see curveballs, and he was about to get pitched an entire inning's worth of them. Enter into our scene the Calavaso family. You might remember this is the other noble family that could have become the rulers of Ustalav, as well as the rulers of the city that had just become the capital prior to the death of the prince. That's a heck of a coincidence, isn't it? Ready for a cascading series of them? Because after the death of Prince Vladislav, a woman came forward with a startling revelation. She had been the consort of the eunuch prince, and she'd given birth to his child. And here I have to break again for another meta talk, because the name of this woman is listed as both Mircalla Calavaso and Milera Calavaso. I would normally just look at the more recent source and use that, possibly making a small joke about it, but I can't. As far as I can see, there's only one source about this, Rule of Fear, which uses both names. And both uses are in entirely different sections and completely different contexts, which makes it really hard to figure out which one should be used. I won't get into the specifics of my logic, but based on what I was able to figure, I think Mileria is the correct name, so that's what I'm going to use. You probably noticed that even though there's some confusion about the first name, Mileria's last name is consistent, Calavaso, the family that controls Kalifas, where the prince just moved the capital to and who would have likely coveted the throne since they didn't get it during the refounding. And she's not a minor member of this family either. She is the sister of the current Countess of Kalifas, Carmilla Calavaso, and she claims that her son, Rene Ardranti Calavaso, is the illegitimate son of Prince Vladislav and the rightful heir of Ustalav. Then, having dropped all of this bombshell, she freaking disappears without a trace, leaving her son to be raised by his aunt. So yeah, Prince Edward is having to deal with all of that over the course of about a year. Additionally, he now has to deal with Carmilla Calavaso, one of the most canny countesses in Ustalav's history, potentially raising his nephew/rival claimant to the throne. It's a lot even for an experienced politician to deal with, and Edward was not one of those. A very straightforward and trusting man, it was pretty easy for advisors with an agenda to manipulate and distract him, which is why what happened next was even possible. We're circling back around to Count Neska and his quest to transform his county into a prosperous one. He'd managed, through luck and shrewd decisions, to turn things around. All the while, he looked at the other lands of the country and saw wasted potential. He was working his people to the bone to make a living, and some other count was just going to let their lands sit around, resources unexploited? Wasteful. And if they weren't going to do anything with it, Neska might as well take it and use it correctly. In 4687, he did just that, accusing Count Oleman Venekdalia of all that stuff I just said, and sending troops to the eastern region of Ardiel to start making proper use of their territory. This was quite the shocking move. Counts might jockey for position in court, but outright military invasion was unheard of. Naturally, the Count of Ardiel sent word to the prince immediately, demanding that this be dealt with. But as we discussed, Prince Edward was kept busy and manipulated by Neska's agents and allies in court, which meant the crown would be of no help. With no other course left, Ardiel forces, with assistance from allies in the county of Varno, attacked the Barstoy invaders in 4689, kicking off the War Without Rivals. Ardiel and Varno had numbers on their side, but Barstoy's troops were more experienced and crucially used a novel tactic to secure their position: trench warfare. Meaning in order to oust Neska's people, the Ardiel forces would need to fight a long, protracted, bloody battle for every inch of land. Neska's rule had shifted after gaining proper control over the county. He started cracking down heavily, instituting draconian laws and exerting control over as much as possible, in service to his vision of an ideal future society. Maybe he was actually right about Count Venekdalia misusing the region of Frisina within Ardiel, but invading the place heavily undermined any point he might have had, and digging in his heels when the people of the county came to get it back destroyed his point completely. He could have just given up, but backing down was never something his stubborn pride could handle. His entire worldview seemed to center around his ideals being the correct moral stance. Being wrong, and especially admitting that wrongness, would crumble everything completely. But he was always in a losing position. Edward could not be distracted forever, and eventually opinions at court would turn against him enough that he would have no choice but to retreat. In 4693, he recalled his troops and ended the war, but not without getting in one last act of spite. See, Neska is a business mogul turned political leader, the two worst things to combine, making him a gigantic vindictive asshole. If he was going to retreat and give up territory, he'd make sure that no one else got to use it either. Barstroy's army burned every village and salted every field they found on the way back home, turning a once fertile region into the desolate expanse now known as the Furrows. Gee, what an efficient and proper use of that territory. You totally don't look like a child throwing a tantrum, Neska. Definitely not. The War Without Rivals is our last major history event, but we do still have a few more things to wrap up before we hit the modern day, and start going over all the places to see in Ustalav. Oddly, most of these events are monster-related. We begin in 4690 with the esteemed Dr. Henry Moritz, or rather his death, as he's murdered by his pet project, a creature assembled from human corpses and monster parts. The creature rampaged through the city of Lepidstadt before disappearing into the night, with sporadic sightings being reported ever since. Quite a few killings around Lepidstadt are attributed to this beast, most recently a string of 13 in 4705, but there are a lot of inconsistencies with these events. It's unknown how many murders are actually the famed Beast of Lepidstadt, and how many are mundane killers hiding their work behind deadly rumors. Next up, in 4692, the young noblewoman Sisandra Livgrace disappeared. Daughter of the Count of Sinaria, Sisandra's father envisioned a grand future for her, both as Countess of Ustalav and one of the most talented and well-trained performers of her generation. He'd sent her to the prestigious Karkow Conservatory, where she excelled and thrived until her 7th year. 7th year at the school, not when she was 7 years old. She was a late teenager at this point, I believe. This was when she had her first encounter with the opera ghost. Most students consider ghosts to be half superstition and half senior hazing ritual, something to blame random accidents and strange occurrences on. But he was much more to Sisandra. She spent hours wandering backstage, attempting to catch a glimpse of the elusive phantom. When she started missing rehearsals and classes, her father was informed of her strange behavior. He called her home and questioned his daughter, who told him of the opera ghost and that it was real and he'd been teaching her so many wonderful things, beyond simple music. Now, Galarian might be a magical setting full of ghosts and mystery, but most of the time, when a young girl tells you a mystery man is teaching her so many brand new things in the darkened corners of the theater backstage, the odds of it actually being a magic music ghost are pretty rare. It's much more likely that a charismatic young stagehand with a passable costume and willingness to take advantage of young ladies has started making some moves. Fearing for his daughter's chastity, the Count confined her to his estate and forbade her from returning until he could sort all this out. Sisandra reacted to this by fleeing into the night. No one knows exactly what happened next. Sisandra disappeared for 3 months, evading any attempt to find her by every force the Count could muster up. She was eventually located huddled in the sewers of Karkow, with no memory of her time away. She spent the next year in a Caliphus hospital recovering and has largely been able to move on from the incident. There are a few oddities that remain, mostly when she hears specific pieces of music that provoke an odd, inexplicable fit of singing and/or info-dumping. Rumors do still sometimes swirl about what happened, but none are spoken where the Countess might hear. Best not to risk her ire now that she's in power. 2 more items to go. In 4698, a gigantic wolf named the Devil in Grey was first sighted. Larger and stronger than any previously seen beast, it prowled the countryside, claiming many victims. The most recent attack took place in 4701, when the Devil in Grey essentially invaded the town of Chastel, terrorizing the population and killing at least 20 people in a single night. Numerous hunters have claimed to have killed the beast, with giant wolf pelts to prove it, but somehow the devil always reappears. Seems like no horror in Ustalav stays dead, even ones that should be mundane. Our final event takes place in 4702, when a set of ancient Kellid idols called the Six-Eyed Stones were discovered around the ruins of Calyx Court. These relics were supposed to be sent to Sinkomakti for further study, but vanished at some point during transit and have not turned up since. Having seen any fantasy horror story, I know it's not a good thing when ancient artifacts go mysteriously missing, especially as we talk more about Calyx Court later on. And that's it, we're done with history. I know it seems like a big gap between that last one and our endpoint at 4707, but keep in mind some of the stuff I said was a little out of order to make it flow better, and some things are better covered when we talk about the current state of Ustalav's various counties. Now that we've finally finished our history lesson in a nice, concise manner, don't look at the runtime, it's a liar who hates you, we can get on to exploring Ustalav and seeing all the wonderful places you can visit in this horrible, horrible country. The counties of Ustalav. Alright, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started right away. As we went over before, Ustalav can be divided into 3 territories: the Palatinates, Soyvoda, and Verilich. We'll do the loner first, followed by the 3 palatinates, then finish off with the big chunk from Soyvoda. Thankfully, each region is connected geographically. Can you imagine how annoying it would be if all 3 palatinate counties were spread out across the rest of Ustalav? Very annoying is the answer. So let's talk Virlich. Technically not a county, it's just a territory controlled by Ustalav. Prior to the Whispering Tyrant's rule, it was 2 counties, Grodlich and Virholt. The history of their fall tells 2 different stories. Grodlich was a victim, the first place to fall beneath the tyrant's skeletal boots. Virholt, on the other hand, fell by its own hand. The unknown Count of Virholt sold his people and his county to the Lich in exchange for his own hide. How well that actually worked out for him, we don't know, but Tar-Baphon considers honoring a deal a matter of convenience. He'd do it right up until the point it became a problem. Then the deal was worth about as much as the paper it was printed on. We'll see some other results of deal-making with Tar-Baphon later that don't paint a good picture for this count. Now, the Shining Crusade ended when Tar-Baphon was sealed inside Gallowspire, his fortress-turned-prison built on the ruins of Atarak, the former county seat of Virholt. It's difficult to talk about Gallowspire in much detail. In 4707, Tar-Baphon is still sealed inside, and the people of Ustalav just consider it a monument to their victory over their undead tormentor. But, spoilers for way later, the last adventure path of Pathfinder 1st Edition revolves around the Tyrant coming back out, so that can is not going to stay sealed forever. Even closed, Gallowspire and its master cast a long shadow over the surrounding land. Because while Tar-Baphon was a load-bearing boss, the walls of his House of Horrors still had some structural stability of their own, allowing them to survive his fall. An advantage the undead have over the living is, well, there are a lot of them, but this one's very obvious when you compare them like that. They aren't alive. They don't have needs, don't decay, and don't get tired. A garrison of skeletons and zombies can remain on standby in a hidden bunker for centuries and still be ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Meaning the area surrounding Gallowspire is littered with bony landmines primed to blow. And that's just the unattended forces. As you'll see when we go over the rest of our points of interest, Virlich is lousy with Tar-Baphon's Whispering Way cultists and former lieutenants working to free their master or carve out their own mini-kingdoms. Knights from Lastwall do regular patrols to stop this exact thing, but Virlich is a large place and Tar-Baphon's corrupting magic lingers in the land, making survival for the living exceptionally difficult. That's why there's only one real city in Virlich, Ruido. It's kind of a city of last resort. People who wouldn't be welcome anywhere else, for whatever reason, can find a place here. A lot of the population is abnormal in some way, which is not a good thing to be in a land as suspicious as Ustalav. Many residents were driven out of their former homes by a bunch of peasants who were very angry at them for random reasons, and many of them spend their time plotting revenge that will have those ignorant peasants ruin the day they drove them out. But, every neighborhood has its quirks. Strangers sometimes get a mixed bag when they come here. Those looking to move can find a close-knit community of comrades, but only after they've proven themselves a friend in turn, and not an infiltrator looking to root out corruption, or whatever someone with an overabundance of righteous zeal was spouting off about that week. Now, Ruido is the only official town out here, but it's not the only settlement. Cultists of the Whispering Way gather in various places to make plans and attempt to free or assist their imprisoned master. Wren Church is the largest rallying point, the spiritual heart of the cult if we're being generous with our terms. What little Tar-Baphon's able to communicate from inside his prison is usually funneled through Wren Church before being sent out to the wider cult. If Wren Church is the heart of the cult, Gaster Hall is the brain, and like most undead brains, it's a little mushy and cluttered with cobwebs. Intended as a master repository of knowledge and collected items of power, the Palace of Travesties right now feels a lot more like that room in the basement full of that stuff your dad won't throw out because he might need it for a project someday. It's all extra magic screws and instruction manuals in Orcish for DVD players you don't even have anymore. During the Tyrant's actual reign, it was more organized and served more of a purpose, but now the only reason it hasn't been abandoned completely is the Demi-Lich Gear. To keep up the metaphor, Gear is the grandpa that got really into model trains after he retired and now spends all his time in the basement working on his giant model train set. Except, the sinister version of that. The more sinister version of that. There are 2 additional locations touched by the Tyrant's hand. Casnoriva is the first, and during Ustalav's pre-Tyrant days, it was a school for teaching magic. It was originally founded by a companion of Svevita Ustav, a wizard named Casnori. For the first several years, Casnori was a magical instructor/royal advisor, but eventually he got bored and wandered off to the Great Big Somewhere else to do, wizardly things. I'm gonna assume he eventually choked on an astral shrimp and died. But the school carried on after he left, up until Tar-Baphon rose to power. As an arrogant nerd, one of the few things Tar-Baphon is actually wary of is a collection of other nerds who could out-nerd him. So he decided to test their magical skills with one simple test. Nice summoning magic, idiots, now do it with PvP enabled. Since the school is now a ghost-haunted ruin, I think you can guess how that went. Our second location, the Garden of Lead, was once a wonderful place for the royals of Ustalav to relax and enjoy themselves. Back then it was called the Garden of Leads. It gained its current name when a minion of Tar-Baphon, an undead woman named Dina, stormed the place with her horde of undead and trapped the nobles inside. She then had molten lead poured over the entire place, preserving it as a macabre metal statue garden. While she was at the time a loyal follower of the Whispering Tyrant, Dina escaped his imprisonment and has retreated to her garden ever since, content to set out her days in madness with the ghost of her victims. Our final location in Virlich is Siknavier's lair. Now, this being a lair, you might astutely guess that it's occupied by some kind of monster, and you would be correct. Specifically, a powerful umbral dragon named, wait for it, Siknavier. Pretend to be shocked, please. Now, this lair has been in this region since the founding of Ustalav, which would make them an incredibly ancient dragon. However, people have killed Siknavier before, multiple times. Confirmed kills, with body and everything. This being Ustalav, you'd probably expect an undead dragon-type scenario, but the truth is far more mundane. Siknavier is a title as well as a name. When one Siknavier dies, another takes their place. I can't be sure if this is always a familial thing, but I know the current holder slew his mother for the position, so I'd be willing to bet that's a pretty common story, especially since the current Siknavier has a son all too willing to repeat history. And we might get that repetition soon, as Siknavier VI is rumored to be half mad from the whispers of dead dragons that swirl around his lair. Not sure about you, but I prefer my dragons sane enough to negotiate with. It helps keep them from pulling out the really nasty, weird tricks they all have up their sleeves. Now, a fundamental aspect of world building for games like this is places where things are bad. If everything is peaceful and solved, you don't have a game or a potential plot to latch onto. Ustalav has a lot of small places like this sprinkled throughout, but Virlich is one big sandbox. You have one slightly hospitable town, and the rest is out to kill you. Even the last wall patrols sweeping through aren't safe, because they might decide you're a disguised cultist they need to smite first and question never. Of course, the biggest bad of all looms large, ready to break out when you least expect it. Or when you play Tyrant's Grasp. Or any game set after the start of 2nd edition, but we're not there yet. Let's leave Virlich behind and move to the Palatinates. We might as well start with Canterwall, because it's both alphabetically first and directly north of Virlich. I love when things come together like that, though it won't happen much more in this video. Now, Canterwall was not always Canterwall. Previously it was known as Tam Ravenna. The name changed during the Palatinate's founding revolution. For consistency, I'm going to keep calling it Canterwall for the rest of this section, even if we dip into the past, because Tam Ravenna is also the name of a city, and this should keep things making sense. Canterwall is actually one of the most precariously placed counties in Ustalav, because of the border with Belkzen. 3 other counties share that border, but we've already gone over why that isn't as much of an issue for them. Virlich is a bad target, the 2 northern ones are defended by the Tusk Mountains, but Canterwall just has flat plains, making for easy travel and pretty easy raids. Canterwall has tried a couple of counteroffensives, but they've gone poorly. We saw how Kosovan didn't work out, but their other attempt was building a giant wall along the border, which also didn't work out. Now the wall, aptly called Bleak Wall, is a crumbling monument to poor ideas. Most of the fortification has eroded away or been stripped for building materials, leaving only a few places still worth talking about. Some small unnamed turrets are still occasionally used as garrisons if they're whole enough, but this is pretty rare. On the northern part of the border stands Castle Ondachi, likely named for the count that caused the whole Champion of Zon-Cathon thing. At some point, they should consider renaming it to Castle— oh wait, my actions have consequences? More fitting. The second location along Bleak Wall is Tower Valbalis. No idea who or what Valbalis is or why they get a tower, but they have one. It's shunned by folks from both Ustalav and Belkzen, as something sinister lairs there that doesn't care for either side. Also, I should get a medal for not giggling at the name Tower Valbalis. Valbalis. Rather than military might or a stupid wall, the real thing that took pressure off Canterwall was a juicier target. Last Wall is stronger and better defended, but it's also worth more, both because it simply has more available wealth, but also because a harder target brings more glory when you crack it. So, more aggressive Belkzen orcs prefer to head down south instead of east. Canterwall isn't left alone, but raids are at a pretty historic low. Now, while the county changed its name, Tam Ravenna the city still exists, serving as the county seat. While fortified to provide protection against raids, in recent times the strong walls have felt more like a prison than a protection. The Guard have turned into zealous defenders, patrolling the town in search of crimes and moral impurities. And gosh, wouldn't you know it, they always happen to find just enough of those to keep the citizens paranoid. Compounding matters is the current captain of the Wall Guard, Barlton Rusraken, whose childhood trauma has festered into a burning hatred of anything orcish. His desire for safety at all costs might be driving his home down a very dark road. The rest of Canterwall is small farming towns and hamlets. It's actually one of the more fertile regions of Ustalav, growing a good chunk of the nation's food. It's important to remember that Ustalav is pretty far north on Avestan, and also rather mountainous, so the locations for farming are limited. Now, farms are super important, everyone loves getting food, but they're also hard to keep track of or protect, being so isolated and spread out. Many smaller settlements simply fall off the map and disappear as hard times hit. Clover's Crossing is one such place, previously a nice little town along the northern border. Then the sinkhole opened and ghouls poured out, slaughtering everyone living there. Now all that's left is a rotting pit, open for the world to stumble into. Though ironically that makes it good enough to put on our map rather than take off. Small comfort. What a lovely thought. But it's not all bad news. There are many thriving towns in Canterwall. Like Ravengro. Ravengo's doing great. Just a flourishing village along Lake Lias. Absolutely perfect place to live, so long as you ignore Harrowstone, the old burnt-out prison full of dead screaming ghosts. Just don't look at it. It's like the dishes in the sink or the ever-growing laundry pile on the floor. And no, I can't put the laundry in the basket. That's where the clean laundry is kept before it's folded. Then it goes onto the clean laundry chair. Not to be confused with the dirty laundry chair for when the floor pile is too big. What was I talking about? Alright, Canterwall's thriving towns. Another one of those is Marion Lay. The entire place is centered around the estate of Lady Aurora de Merval, a dowager who survived the tragic passing of her husband. Plural. All 9 of them. Damnedest thing, they just keep dropping. So strange. But on the upside, she's single. Even if you don't want to pursue her, men still flock to Marion Lay, as the population is around 90% women. A little odd, but it's just built on the reputation of the location attracting certain people. They don't kick out men or shun male babies or anything, men are totally welcome. Of course, there's a certain kind of man this place tends to attract, the ones eager to comfort lonely young women. You know, it's funny, that kind of guy, even when he comes, seems to have a radical change of heart and leaves just as quickly, often going so fast they don't even grab their belongings or tell any of their companions. What an odd thing to do that we won't be examining further, on account of how non-suspicious it is. Speaking of not examining things further, our last location is Saffron House. Saffron House appears to be an abandoned, dilapidated home decaying in Sclarian Swamp. The only thing wrong with that is that my previous sentence was a lie. Once it was true and Saffron House was a house, but the house is gone. It died in a way that left space. Sliding into that space, in the cracks between walls, came a thing. It's heaved its way into the world in a spiral twist that makes more Saffron House. Outside seems normal, but walk the halls and you'll find hours passing between rooms that slide and twist into a wiggling maze, subsuming everything into a new reality. And soon you question why you haven't found the back door yet. Where are the windows? How long have we been walking? Where are we? Oh right, we're in Saffron House. Close the door behind you. But for all the horrible, horrible places that loom across Canterwall, the people here endure, and that's another part of why Ustalav is so interesting. Horror media has a reputation for being kind of a downer sometimes, full of sad feelings and tragic endings and horrible deaths, but tragedy needs hope and optimism to provide contrast, to compel you to turn the page and see what keeps happening next, to endure the long cold night so that the sun can rise. The problem comes living solely on hope. Sometimes you need to be proactive, to take action, to walk out and tell the dark things haunting the shadows that you will not be hunted, you will hunt. And the county of Lazari, our next destination, embodies that spirit more than anything. Most of the county lives in the shadow of the Shudderwood, an ancient forest whose dark boughs hide dangerous predators. Back when Ustalav was first founded, the Shudderwood was the last holdout of the Kellid people. According to legend, they never really left. Instead, they embraced a dark transformation to better survive in the shadows. Now their descendants stalk the woods as an unholy combination of beast and man, howling at the moon that holds the leash to their curse. So yeah, werewolf forest, all chock full of wolfy boys, puppy gals, and NB doggos. Most of the non-Lycan population lives outside the forest, content to let the monsters keep to themselves. This means that, despite being the largest of the Palatinates, Lazari has the sparsest and most spread out population. But size isn't everything, as proven by Lazari being the spark that lit the fire of revolution that formed the Palatinates. The ideas may have come from Violend, but it was Lazari that made them a reality. It began with the Buturn family of Chastel. Since the story ends with the nobility being overthrown, you can probably guess what kind of people they were. But the straw that broke the camel's back was when the head of the family attempted to execute Gillen Locknave, a well-loved local brewer, for the crime of insults. Very classy. Adding to the insult, the execution method was being fed to a pit of hungry wolves. This went over poorly. What went over much better was the patriarch of the Buturn family, who literally went over the edge of his pit into the jaws of his starving executioners. Surprisingly, he actually survived, though heavily injured, and managed to flee town with his sons. We don't know where they ended up, but given the revolution that followed, I'd guess the farthest place from Lozeri they could find. Over the next year, the revolution spread throughout the county and into neighboring Canterwall and Vineland. Despite the ugly beginning, the change in the Palatinates was mostly bloodless. A lot of the nobles decided to either flee or negotiate with people rather than fight it out to a bloody end, which, good for them. Unfortunately, this also undermines the Palatinates somewhat, because while titles might be gone, money and status are less easily stripped. Most of the ruling Council of Lozeri still come from nobler stock and treat the new government exactly like the old one, with little concern for the people. Whether that holds with time, we've yet to see. As for Chastel itself, the town takes great pride in being one of the largest cities in Lozeri, which is a statement that is both true and, let's call it, ambitious. Anywhere else, it would barely squeak into the town slot, but to Lozeri it's a bustling metropolis. There isn't much safety in numbers though, as Chastel has suffered numerous attacks from strange animals, from swarms of rats to the recent deadly attacks from the Devil in Grey. While Chastel is a victim of natural savagery, the town of Morsay to the north has a far more self-inflicted problem. A logging town at the edge of the Shutterwood, the people of Morsay have a healthy respect for the monsters that prowl under the trees. Just stick to the edge and you're mostly safe from the animals and beasts that live within. But that logic can't really save you when the problem is a tree. It starts with a classic mistake. An old-growth tree named Damon's Hand was recently cut down. Here's a good tip for you: don't mess with trees that have names. You know how messed up a tree needs to be to get a name? Super messed up. And Damon's Hand, seriously? That's topping the list of things whose names should tell you to leave them alone, alongside things like Bone Mangler and General Yunnan, Scourge of the Sand War and Defeater of Ragnar the Wretched. No touchy tree. Unfortunately, they touchy tree. And the interior of said tree wasn't filled with tasty wood to infuse into your ice cream or make into a cutting board. No, it was filled with bats, which don't belong in ice cream or cutting boards. Or homes. Unfortunately for you, the bats have a counter-argument called swarming you, swarming you, swarming you, swarming you. It's an effective tactic. Every night they descend on the town and only leave in the morning when the local church bell tolls. The sound calls the bats back to the woods, like they're being drawn away by something or someone. Yeah, you know I had to do that ominous ending bit. It's a classic setup. That all sucks. Is there any town in this place that's nice? Well, let's look at Cotard across the woods. It's much more pleasant, set in a small river valley and surrounded by dairy farms. Most people live on the slopes overlooking it, while the more well-off reside down in the valley near the river. The town only has one claim to fame, which is its odd pair of wells. One of them, the Living Water, still sees frequent use, and despite the name, just seems to be regular water. But just a few feet away is the Darkling Draught, a second well that's shut tight with an iron seal and rusty chains. There's a tiny hole in the seal that allows you to look inside, but there's not much of a reason to do that as the interior is pitch black. Local legend says a piece of the night sky fell in here long ago, and that's why the well is sealed. It's just not clear if it's a keep you out seal or a keep it in seal. Alright, we've circled the Shutterwood, but our last location is going to take place inside it, because even in a haunted werewolf forest, someone's going to try to attract tourists. Askenor Lodge is an opulent compound where the idle rich while away the time between dangerous hunts in the woods. And if hunting isn't your thing, Askenor has other amenities for you, like a theater, spa, restaurant, and a fine selection of companions for those that know how to ask. Guarded riverboats transport clients and relatives safely in and out, while the servants live on site. On paper, that's for their safety and convenience. In practice, if they're allowed to leave, people outside might learn more about the things that really go on at Askenor Lodge. Lozeri helps us check off another horror trope for Ustalav, the spooky haunted woodlands, while also giving another large area for GMs to play around with. Got someone eager to go hunting in your group? Lozeri is the place for them. But if learning is more your thing, then I welcome you to our next county, Vineland, home of the prestigious Lepidstadt University. Before that, it was home to numerous Kelid sacred sites. Built from stone and venerating unknown gods, these ruins attracted attention from explorers, occultists, and scientists, all seeking to understand just what the heck was going on here. To date, no one's found a proper answer. The start of these investigations began here, in Calyx Court. During the Kellad's time, the living and dead mingled, their wisest shamans buried beneath the great stones so their knowledge might live on in the spirits. But then Ustalav and his conquest drove out or killed the Kellads, and no one remained to bury the dead. The spirits slept in Calyx Court, awaiting the return of their descendants. Instead, they got adventurers, the kind that see ancient burial grounds and imagine the riches stored within, the kind that explore too greedily and too deep. The dead woke and dozens perished, with only 2 making it out alive, the Treyas twins. The official story is that Liron and Cardamon Treyas escaped a tragic accident, caused by an assistant of theirs which collapsed the site. But in private writings, the two confess the truth. They collapsed Calyx Court themselves, to seal the awoken Kellad spirits inside, for the spirits know what was done to their descendants, and they are very angry. As bad as that was, the Treyas twins definitely landed on their feet, going on to found the University of Lepidstadt, in the city of the same name. Now it's one of the most famous places in Ustalav, focusing on the mortal sciences. Things like technology, electricity, and mundane medicine, which gives the university its own specific niche, as opposed to other universities where magic holds a lot of sway. Pushing the boundaries of what's thought possible without magic is something only really possible at Lepidstadt. At least, that's what the enrollment brochures would have you believe. And there have been some very strange things to come out of the university from that boundary pushing, like the infamous Beast of Lepidstadt, the frightening charnel creation built from stitched together remains of who knows how many people. It killed its creator, Dr. Henry Moritz, and has allegedly killed many more since with its vicious hook. But rumors also say it's 15 feet tall, feasts on the souls of children, and can travel through lightning storms. Don't get me wrong, it's killed people, but there's a lot more fiction than fact to its story. As good as the university is for the town, there is a clear divide between the students and the people that simply live in Lepidstadt. The focus on science and rational thought gives the students an "oh ho ho, we're so smart and above the superstition of those silly peasants" kind of attitude. But intelligence and wisdom are separate stats for a reason. You can explain all you want the physical properties of Aconitum vulparia don't do anything to deter the encroachment from Canis lupus species, but people are still going to hang wolfsbane above their door to deter werewolves. And if the aura of smugness isn't enough to tell you who's a student and who's a resident, the distinctive facial scar will. Called a Lepidstadt scar, these are earned by students in a trial against their fraternity members, where they must duel opponents one by one until a cut is landed on the face. They are then forbidden from healing this with any kind of magic, so that the cut scars over and becomes a symbol of their time at Lepidstadt and all it's taught them. Before Lepidstadt, the most famous location in Vineland was Cantor House, the former home of Aldous Cantor and the founding location of the esoteric order of the Palatine Eye. Actually, there's a bit of a connection between the two, as the town of Lepidstadt is home to the Spiral Cromlich, the group of standing stones where Aldous performed his occult ritual that disgraced him centuries ago. No one knows what he was doing, or if it was tied to what has ultimately become of Cantor House. The actual building burned down in 4399 and exposed a large stone egg that was somehow hidden inside. That stone egg is still there, just sitting around. Except for once a year, when the calendar ticks over between one year and the next. Then something inside seems to move, possibly attempting to hatch, though to date nothing has ever emerged. Our final location is Schloss Karamak, the castle to the now former Count of Vineland, Alpon Karamak. The castle is generally unremarkable except for one thing. It's frequently targeted by lightning strikes, even more than you'd usually expect with a large castle. Karamak is dismissive of any rumors that talk about this, saying there's perfectly normal explanations like swamp gas or weather balloons or shutting up and stopping asking questions. Any connection you might make between this castle, a previously mentioned monster from a roughly nearby town, and a piece of fiction by Goth Queen Mary Shelley is purely coincidence, I assure you. And that's the Palatinates. Oh, if you're wondering about a potential connection between that name and the esoteric order, I couldn't actually find anything. I did find the definition for the word Palatine, though. It's a Roman chamberlain to the emperor, so now we all know that. I don't see how that could connect between One Man's Fallen Angel fanfiction and political revolution, but I could just not have the vision for it. Here's something I find interesting about the region, though. The Palatinates aren't really that different from Soyvoda. The system of government has changed, but the mood doesn't really feel shifted. They are both still Ustalav. That's neither good or bad, it's just an observation. In other countries, this might be a big point of divide between the people, but it's mostly a footnote here. Now I need to back that observation up, so let's get started on the Soyvoda counties with Amans. Amans neighbors Virlich and is mostly mountainous terrain. Looking at our map, you can see a lot of hills surrounding the peaks. That makes Amans a very hard place to live. The soil is rocky and unsuited for farming, which keeps the population low. Most of the people are concentrated in Kavapesta, a city controlled by the Pharasman penitents. The city is very dour, living under strict religious guidelines. Enduring suffering is a point of pride to its people, to the point of several plagues having ripped through the population who simply stuck around and waited it out rather than leaving, since they believe these are trials sent by Pharasma to test their resolve. Given the frequency of them though, I'd start to wonder if they are in fact presents sent by Urgathoa to take advantage of suckers. But I guess that's just me not being devout enough to the Lady of Graves. I mean, it makes sense, I'm a Desnan. Kavapesta is the most easily accessible city in Amans, but ironically also the most insular. Outsiders bring radical new ideas like putting spices in food and dancing on occasion, and we can't have that now, can we? This attitude isn't just towards foreigners or even people from other counties. The other residents of Amans, the Vale folk, also get this treatment, being seen as backwards peasants who also have far too much indulgence in their life. That feels like a contradiction to me. Vale folk occupy the numerous small villages that dot the landscape. The kind of place where you can write every resident's name on a piece of paper and still have room for a holiday dinner shopping list. They are quite diverse, as the valleys that crisscross the mountain range can have shockingly different environments. Everything from foggy bogs, sheltered lakes, and spooky forest glades, and even stranger hide in the landscape, waiting for a family to stumble into it. With every one of them, you have an accompanying tale of a fey or eldritch creature living on the edge of that community. This combination has bestowed the region a fitting name, the 100 Haunted Vales. As ominous as that all sounds, most of the people here just want to live in peace and make the most of their situation. It does make them quite superstitious, though. Strangers are assumed to be fey in disguise until proven otherwise, so expect a few handfuls of iron shavings thrown into your face as you wander around. Rude as that may be, it does make sense. Strangers rarely have a reason to come here, so the odds that they're actually a malicious fey trying to scam free children is at least 50-50. Funny enough, that lack of visitors is what attracts the few people who do come here. Sometimes you just want to go somewhere quiet without all the great complications of city life and just be for a while. Most people would gravitate to Aaron's Rest, the largest village in the area. A lovely place home to weavers and herders just living a simple life, they've covered their town in folk art that tells the story of their lives. Don't start asking too many questions about minor details like missing people or something called blood wards that need to be maintained. Still better than our next two places, which are best avoided. The first, thankfully, super easy to avoid. Cold Heart is a rocky valley nestled in the southern peaks of the Hungry Mountains, the sides of which are so steep that they are unclimbable without magic. The bottom is a boggy swamp with vines that creep up the rocks, desperate for freedom, but stuck down here as much as anything else. Eerie rumors swirl around this location, not helped by the fact that it's almost exactly shaped like a human liver. Wonder who made that connection first. How'd they notice that? Anyway, there are constant rumors that the entire valley is used by powerful witches for rituals that line the sides and chant ancient rites. Not that anyone's ever seen these witches, but that just proves how true they are. Witches are obviously very good at hiding, which is why there's all these rumors about them being around. Obviously. Now, I pulled a little trick on you. I made our final location, Willowmorn, sound like a horrible place that no one would ever want to go to. But that reputation is overblown, fueled by the people of Kavapesta who imagine the estate of Count Lucian Galdana as an opulent palace of luxury, filled with debauchery and scandalous activity. But remember, the city considers a warm bed and hot bath to be extravagant luxury. I'm willing to bet the debauchery they whisper about is like hand-holding. The truth of Willowmorn is that it's just Count Galdana's home that he rarely spends time in. As a rugged outdoorsman, the Count prefers to spend his time riding between the various Vale towns and checking in with his citizens. He also needs to make regular trips to Caliphas for political reasons, where he does indulge just a little. But it's a piece of nice cake on a cheat day kind of indulgence, not the incubi-fueled sausage party kind of indulgence that Kavapesta makes it out to be. Now looking at the map, you might have noticed something interesting about Amans. I'm actually going to break my format and jump down the alphabet to talk about this one. Within the county of Amans is an entire separate county, Ulkazar, located in the highest part of the Hungry Mountains, where living is even harder than down in the Vales. There are no large cities here, and the towns are small enough to make the Vale villages look like a bustling metropolis. So why even bother with this place? Why create a whole county here instead of just making it a part of Amans? Because it's a punishment. Ulkazar was originally created as a territory to be ruled by Nuliviso Ulka, second cousin of Soyvida Ustav. It was suspected, though never confirmed, that Ulka betrayed the king to a Kelid army that wasn't able to seal the deal. Since there was no concrete proof, Ustav decided, rather than roll the dice and just off his cousin, he'd try a bit of statesmanship and go the punishment as reward route. And so he bestowed upon his cousin lands and titles that would lead to peak Ustalav living. Get it? Anyway, local legend holds that Ulka starved to death in his own estate. His descendants, who I assume door-dashed something after the funeral, continued governing the county up until the Whispering Tyrant's reign. The war killed them off, but not directly. Ulcazar was too remote to be worth doing anything with, which meant it was too remote to bother supplying with anything during the war. Everyone here either fled or starved to death. After Tar-Baphon's defeat, there wasn't much call to start repopulating. People could live here if they wanted to, but why would they want to? While if you're a group of ascetic Pharasman monks looking to start a monastery, it's perfect. Nothing around but you, silence, and death. A tradition that has continued into the modern day, on the surface. Recalling our history section, the monks that lived here were killed for failing to offer help to Countess Robeska's children. The outside world never learned of this. Only the monks living here and a small group of trusted clients know the truth. This is the headquarters of Anaphexis, a cult of Norgorber dedicated to keeping secrets the most secure way possible, through death. While the monks' general vow of silence is a great cover, it's actually significant to their religion. No one is allowed to spread their secrets, not even themselves. The assassins here actually do cut out their own tongues to avoid that. Only their leader, currently Bishop Yasmardin Sanir, is allowed to keep his tongue and speak to outsiders. Now he does need that, not just because he leads Anaphexis, but because he's also the current Count of Ulcazar. That's quite unusual, as the rulers of Ulcazar used their privileged position to go live somewhere better. Sanir wasn't supposed to inherit his seat. He was the third son in the family and was always meant to join the Church of Pharasma, as ancient tradition dictates. And in the 500-ish years between Robeska and Papa Count Sanir, the truth of the monastery was lost to the rulers of Ulcazar, and so his dad sent him here thinking it was a bunch of regular Pharasman monks. Thus Yasmardin was sent to become a priest and bring honor to the family, and depending on certain definitions, he kind of did. Following a few rounds of sensory deprivation and torture, Yasmardin was very receptive to Norgorber's teachings. I'd say he took it to heart, but he actually took it to several other people's hearts, which is why both his older brothers and the former head monk have all turned up dead. Yasmardin is the first Count of Ulcazar to also be the head of the monastery, as well as the first Count in generations to actually live in the county. In a way that kinda helps sell his cover story. He's a devout monk and a person who cares about his people. How could he ever be a horrible murderer? As for the other nobles, there really aren't any. Most of the holdings in Ulcazar were abandoned during the Shining Crusade and never reclaimed, not being worth the effort. Which is why someone was able to steal one. Now hold on, I know when I said that you think I mean they just moved in and claimed squatters' rights. Incorrect, you fool! Such a trivial matter is not worthy of the name Isla Belson, greatest thief in all of Avestan, self-proclaimed. Nay, in 4691 she stole Castle Panatha, down to the foundation stones. But any thief can steal a castle, only the greatest thief in all Avestan, self-proclaimed, can put it back. But not just any putting it back, no. Because after all, nearly any thief could also put the castle back exactly as they found it. Only the greatest thief in all Avestan, self-proclaimed, could put it back with a new gold-capped tower in place as well. Whether she currently lives in the tower is unknown. It could just be a place to store all her valuables. After all, who's gonna trek all the way out here to get it back or check on her? Now, I was going to talk about Wait's Span next, but I actually took too long getting here. The entire town was ravaged by a fire, sparked by a rogue lightning strike that tragically claimed the lives of the 24 residents. Such a tragic thing, so completely unexpected. Consider, though, that our source on this is Count Bishop Sanir, and that Wait's Span is located rather close to the Monastery of the Vale. Close enough they might have seen something. Yeah, I'm calling shenanigans on that fire. Our final location is a small valley called Gosh, whose name is... you'll see what I mean. 3 people live here, a coven of witches formed by 2 hags and 1 human. All we have to go on are the names and descriptions of these sisters of Gosh. See, it's a lot more obvious when I say it, isn't it? Anyway, the hags. First is Librix, who traded her nose to something for a staff of living roots. Next is Sothmoa, an iron hag who acts as a twisted mother to, and I quote here, a litter of ghosts. That's a combination I don't like. Our final member is the human Hypatia, who stands out not just because of her ancestry, but also her cruelty. Keep in mind, hags are monstrous supernatural predators, and yet she is the leader here. Think about that if you ever have to deal with them. Ulcazar is interesting in that it deals with a different kind of horror from the rest of Ustalav. It's more environmental. The fear comes from just being alone somewhere that doesn't care about you. The isolation that comes from knowing there is no one else around. You could walk for miles alone, with nothing but the howling wind and your own thoughts. It's a haunting without ghosts, though you can still find plenty of those around too. I like the way it emphasizes the different flavors of horror at play in Ustalav by being just a little different. But let's get back onto our alphabetical track with some more human horrors. Ardiel is our next destination, and it deals with the very human horror of having been replaced by a younger, cooler capital and having to cope with getting old and irrelevant. They say they're over it, it's no big deal, everything's fine, but then someone brings up Caliphos in any way and the facade just crumbles as they start ranting. The county as a whole remains very bitter at Prince Vladislav, who moved the castle just to please a mistress he didn't even live long enough to marry. It spits in the face of their heritage. Ardiel was named for Ardelia Ustav, the first wife of their founder. The county has a prestige to it, a long history tied in with Ustalav's refounding after the Whispering Tyrant. Whatever the prince's intention, moving the capital was an insult that no one here has forgotten. But that insult takes a backseat to the more mundane issue that moving the capital has caused. Ardiel was previously a very nice place to live, its prosperity driven by the constant flow of people in and out of the county to attend business in the capital of Ardis. Now that traffic is gone, and many of the nobles with it, local businesses used to catering to a refined and wealthy clientele now have only their equally impoverished neighbors as customers. And there's only so long you can pass the wealth around before it stops making ends meet. Many citizens resent the nobility who left them for better places. Older generations embrace a proud form of true patriotism, the idea that their county was betrayed and they keep the real spirit of Ustalav alive within it. The younger people are instead looking to the neighboring palatinates and wondering how far those ideas might go. Meanwhile, what remains of the nobility spends their time stuck in county estates, pretending nothing has changed while the family coffers dwindle from the weight of supporting the life they once had. Not everyone left Ardis for the new capital. In fact, a Caliphos-born celebrity chose to settle down here instead. Alison Kindler is a retired adventurer, former pathfinder, and well-regarded author whose works of gothic fiction are based on her own life encounters with horrors of Ustalav. Some are more true than others, like the tale of her killing Viscount Galdice, a powerful vampire who ruled a portion of Amons in most of the 4600s, taking dozens of vampire brides. Kindler and her fiancé, Duristan Barlheim, confronted the Viscount in Castle Galdice and put an end to him, at least according to her book. She might want to double check that though, as locals say they can still sometimes see lights among the ruins. Might be better left for a younger generation though, as Kindler is retired. Now she spends her time writing historical romance fiction, but I'd bet many of Ustalav's monsters still check to make sure she's sitting cozy at home. Even at her advanced age, I'd still bet on her versus any of them. Adventuring is a profession that kills a lot of younger people, so always keep an eye on those who grow old doing it. But Kindler's fame can't stop the slow bleed facing Ardis, or keep the countryside from falling into neglect. Many of the villages here were founded specifically to support the estates of nobles, who would keep family and artists to represent them at court, or babysit embarrassing cousins. Some more wealthy families have managed to turn these villages into their own mini-counties, supporting the population in exchange for servitude, but we can see the more likely story play out in Langit Heath. Originally owned by the Lossamore family, they sold the estate when the capital moved. The land then changed hands so many times that even the owners lost track of it, and the population slowly drifted away. In other towns like this, the land returned to untamed wilderness, but in Langit Heath, things are a bit more strange. Every spring, spiraling fields of flax are planted, interrupted by odd circles in the crops that appear without explanation. Passers-by report seeing children, or at least children-sized figures, moving among the fields and estate grounds. Depictions of these children differ wildly, but there is one commonality, a set of striking blue eyes. Compared to the abandoned towns full of creepy kids, Barus is doing quite well. Their luck has been incredible, with trees bearing fruit all year round, fishing nets constantly full, and flowers blooming no matter the season. It's a paradise, and a very walled garden. Locals believe that everyone else is jealous of their bounty, and the starving masses are only days away from descending like locusts on them for a taste of what they have. Anyone without urgent or important business is turned away by the paranoid townsfolk. That's an attitude I find troubling and short-sighted, but more pressing are the rumors of a cult that sprung up in town. They worship a primal land goddess named Mother Single, who claims responsibility for the village's bounty. What exactly she wants in return is vague, but given she's been feeding people, it's possible she'd like a few meals of her own in return. Our final location will serve as a bridge between Ardiel and Barstoy. You might remember from our history section that these two had a teeny tiny little bit of a civil war as a treat. And I do think that Count Neska started out with at least a little bit of a point. Ardiel isn't resource poor. The capital moving was a blow, but it wasn't a fatal one. Proper management, similar to what he was proposing, could have helped the county recover and create a new identity for itself. However, he tried to enforce that point with a sword made of capitalist exploitation, one that would have seen the people ground to dust in the name of profit. And how he ended the war cemented his legacy as the villain of this piece. The furrows are now a testament to Neska's greed and cruelty, a salted and burned out patch of land fit only for the dead. They're actually a starkly modern horror. The rest of Ustalav evokes more gothic horror tropes, fears that feel old, that have been around for a long time. But what we fear changes as society moves forward. The Furrows, and Barstow as a whole, draw on this modern kind of fear. The restless dead here aren't the victims of an evil wizard, they are men and women who died in the trenches, who fell in a senseless war waged for inches of ground. That just kind of hits differently, you know? Maybe a little too close to home. This horror is even more modern in Barstow proper, where the people are, in theory, prosperous and rich, which doesn't sound horrible until you look at the detail. This prosperity started when Nesca took a barren backwater and spent his vast fortune in investing in the land and its people, which can be good depending on the intent. Cause see, there's investing in your people, and then there's investing in your people, and that kind of investing expects a return, by any means necessary. Nesca now controls his county with an iron fist, demanding people toil and serve to bring about the prosperity he demands. And he demands a lot. He mandates the worshipping of Pharasma and forbids the practice of arcane magic, along with imposing strict morality laws. It's harshest in the county seat of Viscay, where strict curfews are enforced by grey-clad enforcer thugs drawn from the people most loyal to Nesca. Citizens live in a constant state of fear and paranoia, where the most rewarding thing isn't helping those around you, but turning on one another in a race to become the biggest rat possible, with the question of guilt a secondary concern. This trickles outwards to the surrounding county, as those who please the count are rewarded with lands and titles, creating a system of oppression that bleaches the entire place grey. Nesca's most painful touch is in Sterniday, the town closest to the Furrows. When the wind shifts, the ashes of war drift north, along with the tang of salted earth. Everything here is tainted by war crimes, to the point where the veterans often see ghosts of the fallen drifting in the dust. Now, I've been very harsh towards Nesca regarding the Furrows, and I want to elaborate here on why that is. I've said it a few times, there was a cogent point to be made about the other leaders of Ustalav. Hereditary nobility is often corrupt, incompetent, and wasteful. It's possible he could have made better use of the territory if he was in charge of it. And since he's pretty old, I can also see him acting with urgency, in case Pharasma comes calling sooner rather than later. All of that I can understand, but it's how he ended the war, the destruction of the land rather than letting it go, that's what damns him to me. Because that's not the most efficient move. It's not the best use of resources. That's not what you do when your goal is helping people. It's throwing a tantrum when people didn't bow to your genius and let you have your way. Also, on a personal note, I feel like his worship of Pharasma is quite extreme. It's the penitent styled up to 11, almost slipping into outright heresy. Pharasma doesn't demand this level of obedience, nor is she a goddess concerned with morals or mortal behavior. But that doesn't line up with what Nesca wants, so he turns it to a version that more effectively accommodates him. As a result, the Church of Pharasma here is powerful, but very different from the rest of the Inner Sea. That's the most obvious in the name of its biggest temples: Chapel of Guilts, Mother of Skulls, and the Vault of Tears. Those sound kinda sinister, right? Like, that's not just me? Mother of Skulls sounds like a herald of Groidus or a high priestess of Urgathoa, not so much a Pharasman church. And all three are built like fortresses and spend a bit too much time hunting witches compared to tending to the deceased, at least from my perspective. The only one I have anything more to say about is the Chapel of Guilts, which is built near one of Barastoy's salt mines. This means they have a salt mine catacomb for the dead here, which sounds like a weird way to get more mummy jerky. No one tell the British. Gosh, you know I'm desperate for levity when I break out the British eating mummies jokes. Barastoy feels like it wants to be a shining beacon for Ustalav's future, but it doesn't actually have a long-term vision. Just a vague, do what I say and it'll work out because I said it will mentality. More than any other county, Barastoy is tethered to the health and whims of its count, and Nesca is well into his twilight years. He's spent the last few desperately looking for an heir, and has yet to come up with one who suits him. With Pharasma's judgment looming closer, his own devout faith and refusal to extend his life just might be tested sooner rather than later, and we've seen from the Furrows just how he responds to that kind of test. What an ominous note to end on! I'd love to shift to something more upbeat for contrast, but unfortunately we're in Ustalav, where upbeat and optimistic go to fall over and perish. But in the darkest night, a candle is a spotlight, and Caliphos does a pretty good impression of some melting wax. The county and the city, which share a name, have seen a huge influx of people over the past 3 decades. Already large before that, Caliphos is now the largest city in Ustalav, a big upgrade from its humble beginnings. Prior to the Whispering Tyrant, the city had a bit of a reputation. Lots of secretive witches ruling puppets from the shadows. As the dead rose, these witches tried to bargain with the Whispering Tyrant to keep control of the region in exchange for servitude. The Tyrant impolitely declined. Following Tarbafon's defeat, Caliphos recovered pretty quickly. They had a small advantage over other counties. Their ruling noble line had survived. The Calavaso family had endured, and since we're going back to a nobility system, they might as well let them be in charge again. Or maybe they were still in charge during the tyrant's time and proved their ability to keep people safe, and that's why they were allowed to remain in power. The only other family that managed this is the Ordranti, who you'll remember as the ruling family of Ustalav, and they used a different method. If you think the Ordranti family being uplifted above them is something of a sore spot for the Calavasos, congratulations, you get a digital cookie. Enjoy it, it's a snickerdoodle. The Calavasos have built up the county and the city for generations, leveraging the location on Lake Incarthen to great effect. This hasn't gone without issues. You might remember from our history that there is a lot of vampires living under the city. In fact, a chance encounter with one is what started Alison Kindler's career as an adventuring author. But today, the city's issues are far more mundane. It begins with the political machinations of Countess Carmela Calavaso, the Ruby of Caliphas. 50 years ago, she was described as all that is Ustalav by a visiting Lastwall noble, and this has remained true as the decades have advanced. Possessing the looks and energy of a woman half her age, Countess Calavaso is a force whose reach spans all of Ustalav, which leads us to the obvious question: what did she have to do with the moving of the capital, the death of Prince Vladislav, and the disappearance of her own sister? Nobody knows. It could be nothing, but that would be a lot of coincidences stacked on top of each other. And it hasn't escaped anyone's notice how involved she's been with raising her nephew, Rene Ordranti Calavaso. If he is the child of her sister and the former prince, then Rene is the rightful king of Ustalav, not his uncle Eduard Ordranti. The countess has kept uncle and nephew from meeting each other so far, sequestering Rene in an estate back in Ardiel. Whatever plan she's cooking, it's a very long game. The potential conflict has hung over Ustalav like a sort of Damocles for decades now, with no real resolution forthcoming. But also, no real scheme to be found here either. There's no sense of urgency with the countess, and given how long she's lived with her youthful vigor, it might be worth looking into what she is, rather than focusing on her nephew. But that's all just where our problems started. Currently, the city of Caliphas is struggling to accommodate the new status quo following the capital's move. Noble families from around Ustalav need to travel to and reside in the city to conduct business with the crown, which brings more people, from servants to merchants looking to do business. Industry can't keep up with demand, which leaves the poorest of Caliphas stuck in cramped, dirty squalor. Can you see why the vampires might be eaten good? Those that can afford it stick to the rich parts of town, where parks and gardens maintain a sense of space and life within the city. Those that can't look through ash-stained windows and hope for a better life. But Caliphas is not just a city, it's a whole county, and there are plenty of other places to get away from the large city issues. The first place we're going, but most people aren't, is Chateau d'Olaires, the estate of the Calavaso family. The property is gigantic, with a support staff large enough to rival the population of some villages. Wealth is casually displayed with massive gardens and stocked menageries visible from outside. That visibility is important for showing off, because only a small number of people are actually allowed on the grounds. This privacy, some might say secrecy, sparks the usual round of rumors and speculation. We've heard it all before, though given the greater reach and wealth of the Calavaso family, there's probably more truth to these rumors than the ones around Willowmorn. If you're looking to see the sights of Caliphas County, it's definitely worth stopping off in Anactoria, a small town near the bogs at the edge of Albria Woods. The people here farm peat from the bogs for use as fuel. But people don't come here for peat's sake, they come to see the body. A preserved corpse from the bog, called the Maid of Anactoria, legend claims the corpse can do all manner of miracles, from reciting prophecy, to healing, to keeping me focused when writing a script. When it comes to verifying these legends, there isn't much to work with, as attempts by various organizations to buy or study the maid have been refused at every turn. A few of those organizations have responded by looking at the bog and asking, well, probably more corpses out there, right? Good luck on anything involving that. Speaking of aged things, good transition, don't worry about it, we next come to Vauntil, the city of senses. Surrounded by vineyards and flower fields, Vauntil is home to an extravagant and morbid competition, the Last Breath Festival. An expert panel of judges will rate a variety of experiences curated for them to find out which one is worth dying for, or worth killing for, as the festival has a history of tragedies befalling contestants, judges, and everyone in between. This being Ustalav, they've mostly decided to roll with it for marketing. After all, if it's worth dying for, it's worth dying for. Now our final town is in Caliphas, but it is in every other way a Lastwall town. Grace sits on the border between the two nations and is just a nice, fairly quiet place to live. The religious worship of the two nations merges here into a unique pantheon of Pharasma, Iomade, and the Imperial Lord Andolet, also called Grandmother Crow. Her worship bridges the gap between the two other goddesses, just like the chapel bridge that spans the Path River connects Lastwall and Ustalav. It's a connection built to last, for about 12 more years in our timeline, before things in Lastwall get very not good. But that's a story for another time. With that, we leave Caliphos behind and make our way north to the county of Ordranto. Home county of the ruling Ordranti family, Ordranto has a fraught and bloody history. It started with Ustalav's founding, when the Varisians fought off the Kelid tribes living in the area. Most of that conflict seems to have been over the northern territories, since we have a lot more Kelid ruins up here. The tribes that weren't killed fled north, to what would eventually be Sarkoris. Now obviously the Kelids who fled north simply decided, there's no need to go back, they can just have all that. Yeah, I'm sure you all bought that. Similar to how Belkzen's attacks funneled through Canterwall, the Kelid attacks were largely concentrated on Ordranto. Once again, this is because of geography. Lozeri's northern border is about 90% Shutterwood, which presents an equal amount of cover and danger. Getting to Violend means either crossing through or around the Shutterwood, so same basic problem. Off to the east, Cenaria's northern border has a lake and several large bogs, which adds either boats or swamp traversal to the mix. Path of least resistance means that most attacks go between the woods and the lake bogs, right where Ordranto sits. Numerous border forts were built, garrisoned, and then abandoned as the boundary between the nations shifted back and forth, leaving behind the worst game of Castle Connect the Dots in Avestan. Maybe in the world? My attempt to set up a Castle Connect the Dots league hasn't been going well. Once the Whispering Tyrant rose to power, he sent one of his stronger lieutenants, the Vampire Lord Malyas, to secure the northern Ustalav border, which he did very well, creating fortifications enhanced with necromancy that remain to this day. The most prominent of these is Castle Conquest, spelled like this because Malyas spells his name like this and I hate him. Castle Stupid spelling was his headquarters during the tyrant's reign, and after Tarbafon fell, Malyas retreated here to await his master's return. After the refounding, Ustalav and the Shining Crusade sent forces to crack the castle and get Malyas out, but the siege faltered as the walls magically repaired and lives were lost with no ground gained. A garrison remained for over a century, but since no one was coming out of the castle, Ustalav's leaders determined that Malyas likely escaped years ago, leaving behind the fortification as a decoy. This is actually false. Malyas is still in there, obeying his master's final orders of withdraw and wait. The castle mostly sits quiet, but every new moon in the darkest hour of the night, its bell tolls, reminding anyone who can hear it that the undead can wait a long, long time. Today the border between the Worldwound and Ustalav is quiet, maintained by the wardstones that keep the demons in check. Prior to their establishment, the Kelids of Sarkoris fled south to avoid the demons, and Ustalav's response was slaughter. The site of the worst atrocity was here, at the Ground of Lost Tears. Originally a Pharasman priory, the nuns within were suspected of harboring Sarkorian refugees seeking to avoid death. And they were doing that because they weren't horrible people. However, the Ordranti soldiers pursuing the refugees were horrible people, and when they were denied entry to the priory on the grounds of none of your business, they responded by burning it to the ground. Because of course they did. No sound escaped from the burning building, and when the fire died down, no bones were left behind. Today you can't hear anything in the area except a faint sobbing, and during the Pharasman holiday of the Day of Bones, a shadow opens under the ground and ghostly nuns lead hundreds of Kelid spirits in a prayer service. I like to think this reflects their eventual escape from the burning, but that might be optimistic of me. Now that whole situation was just awful, but you know what would make the tragedy worse? If someone came along and decided to make a profit off of it. Which is exactly what happened with House Boomhall. One night, Niklavos Boomhall hung every living thing in the house. His family, his dogs, his horses, and finally himself. Cursed and horrible. After that, the house was avoided for decades, because obviously. But, don't you see? That just makes it the prime spot for opening a haunted murder hotel. So thought Corinia Averbina, who did exactly that thing I just said. The only person dumber than her is everyone who comes to stay here, especially when they know there's a ghost floating around the entire 4th floor. At least she keeps that floor closed, along with recently shutting down parts of the 3rd floor. This keeps the guests out of danger, though the fact that she's had to expand the area doesn't bode well. So is every location in Ordranto cursed? Yes. Our dog, for example, has been rebuilt dozens of times and sits on top of many Kelid burial sites. Places with such inviting names like Starling Well, Pearler's Field, and Pharasma's Needle sit in and around the town. And they are definitely full of not at all haunted gold that doesn't totally curse you. That's why it's all still there despite everyone knowing about it and wanting it, because of how very not cursed it is. So here's a question. If Ordranto is so cursed, how did the Ordranti survive long enough to become the rulers of Ustalav? Was it some secret cunning survival strategy? Or maybe a powerful magic? Kinda both, but also not really. It's all thanks to the talking head. Let's back up. When the Whispering Tyrant first appeared, people across Ustalav eager for power got their boot-licking tongues all moist and limber. One of those people was a disgraced son of Ordranto's count, Iceland Ordranti. He sold out his county in exchange for eternal life. But he made the classic wish for eternal life blunder of assuming it came with extra perks, like eternal youth and bodily regeneration. It did not. That stuff costs extra counties, pal. Displeased to be a rotting husk instead of not that, Iceland decided to complain to management. His manager was Malleus the Vampire, who solved the problem by cutting Iceland's head off. Can't complain about your decaying body now, can you? Malleus then summoned Iceland's niece and told her, "This is your problem now, get rid of it and make sure I never need to talk to your family about it again." And that is what saved the Odranti family. It didn't spare them any hardship, but it did keep the line alive, if only so no one in charge ever has to talk to Iceland again. In the centuries of undead rule, Ustalav's most annoying head was eventually hidden so well that even the caretakers didn't know where they put it. To the Odranti family, he was just an old legend, one that started screaming at them when they found him buried on the grounds of Castle Odranto. He'd been there a while and was not the most sane. The people who found Iceland had every intention of destroying him, however, an insane idiot wizard is still a wizard. His soul was able to reach out and connect with a descendant, and Iceland had enough control to save his own on life. Only able to control one person at a time, and only a descendant, Iceland was kept hidden, revealed only to the heir after the previous puppet had passed. This continued until Iceland ran into a small logistic issue. People can't always have kids. Count Manfred Maralt was simply not up to the task. Attempts to branch out proved unsuccessful, and interestingly, when he enacted a daring plan to try controlling Prince Vladislav Odranti, something blocked him. It could have been a strong resistance the prince possessed. Magic items that do that are pretty common among rulers for that specific reason, or it could have been the control of a stronger will already in the prince's mind. Whatever the reason, Iceland couldn't brainjack the prince and was forced to look anywhere else he could. And after countless countful nights of county-wide research, he found something. A family branch in Ardog that had fallen into poverty and obscurity, with one boy surviving, Conrest. Count Maralt traveled to Ardog and adopted the young orphan, giving him a pretty nice home life. When Conrest turned 14, the Count brought home another youth, a 10-year-old girl named Lirabella. We're gonna zoom past the step-sibling angle here because the Count's clear intention from the start was matchmaking. And it worked. The two youths grew close to one another and fell in love. Time passed, and eventually so did Count Maralt. On his deathbed, he summoned Conrest and instructed the young man that after the funeral, he was to enter the Count's previously forbidden study and open a secret cabinet with this secret key. Conrest didn't get around to this immediately, since I guess they decided to save on priest rental with a back-to-back wedding-funeral situation, and when you're happily married, you tend to forget ominous adopted dad instructions. But eventually, he remembered. The poor unfortunate boy. Obviously, Iceland's head was in that cabinet. He reached out and managed to gain some control over Conrest, but not complete control. He'd actually tried to grab the boy as soon as he'd arrived years ago, but couldn't quite manage it. Theorizing it was because the familial connection had thinned out too much, Iceland hatched a plan to bolster it by bringing in another distant relative, Lirabella. She wasn't originally an orphan. Iceland got that out of the way pretty quick, though. Now he just needs to control Conrest long enough to get another heir so he can keep up with his creepy non-life. Conrest doesn't have enough control to completely throw off the horrible head, but he can resist long enough to spare Lirabella the family madness for the moment. What a creepy note to end on. Odranto really is cursed. Let's go next door to Cenaria. There's no way that's as bad. Let me just check my notes here real quick and... thank Desna, it's just regular creepy. Cenaria was a sacred place for the Kelid people, who practiced ritual sacrifice along the shores of Lake Porphyria and bound spirits of the dead to the surrounding swamps, burying their bones deep in the muck. These rituals, part occult and part primal, created a deep and powerful magic in the surrounding area, and Tarbafon just loved that kind of thing, really up his alley, so he set about trying to figure it out, but because he's a wizard, he did so through brute force. Many Arcanists died in these waters, but that was a sacrifice he was willing to make. Unclear if it ever amounted to anything, Tarby strikes me as the kind of guy who would keep that up even if it wasn't going anywhere just out of habit, like a subscription you forget to cancel. Even if he got nothing out, he sure put a lot in. Residents of Cenaria all know that there is power in those swamps, but it's not a coherent or well-directed power. This makes the swamp incredibly dangerous to simply wander around in, so naturally there's a whole community inside it. It started with Kelid tribesmen hiding from Ustav's conquest, who were then joined by brigands, scavengers, escaped prisoners, and random people looking to disappear. This odd collection of randos eventually came together as swampers, or leech folk if you're a jerk. Small communities of swampers exist throughout Gravemere Swamp, clustered around ancient Kelid sacred sites and keeping their cobbled-together version of the culture alive. The more civilized city folk of Cenaria look down their nose at the swampers, but they have a healthy respect, read fear, of the swamp's magic. There is more to this land than meets the eye, and the people who can connect with it should never be underestimated. The Lord of Cormegi Manor learned this the hard way. He tried to kidnap swampers to use as indentured servants on his plantation, and their relatives struck back. Lord Cormegi thought he'd stopped them when his thugs cut the swampers down and buried their bodies in the fields. But long before Tarbafon came calling, the dead of the swamp knew how to rise up and take their vengeance. Hest Cormegi's men did not fare so well in round 2. Sadly, the rescued swampers had no way to return their saviors to their rest, and now work the fields for themselves, to keep anyone from looking at the manor too closely. Ustalav does not tolerate the undead after all, no matter how righteous their cause. But if you ask an outsider what Scenaria is known for, they won't say the swamp. They'll say the music. Karkau, the Village of Voices, has trained some of the most renowned singers in Avestan. The Karkau Conservatory Opera isn't just an opera house, it's an entire musical university, where children are trained from a young age for musical theater careers that they hope will echo throughout the ages. But you'll never find a group more superstitious than stage actors. I hear they won't even flirt with people named Beth because they're afraid it'll be considered macking on her and that will drop them stone dead. Karkau's theaters each have their own slew of hauntings and legends, the most famous being the ghost that supposedly kidnapped Countess Sassandra Livegrace in her youth. The city's extensive half-flooded sewer network offers the perfect place for both actual ghosts and unsavory individuals pretending to be ghosts to hide from the rest of the world while they plot these ideas. Scenaria has 2 other locations of note in the swamp. Saints Grove used to be a shrine to Desna, hidden in a grove of olive trees. A priestess of Urgathoa sought the place out, intending to corrupt it in a ritual that would transform her into one of the Pallid Princess's horrifying daughters. Before she could complete the task, Desna intervened. Maybe she felt the blasphemy, maybe she was called by the few worshippers there before they died. The why doesn't really matter. Desna sent a miracle, aging the trees 1,000 years instantly. They grew with all the fury of a claymore mine, their branches turning into a tomb for Desna's followers and a prison for Urgathoa's arrogant half-daughter. Lastly, we have Balalota. This is a swamper's place, deep inside Grademere. Every year, at the vernal equinox, that's the spring one where day and night are the same length, all the daughters of the swamp come together and dance, their movements invoking ancient Kellid spirits, who come forth to live in flesh for a single night. This is not a dance of joy, but more a dance of solitude, because inside the flowing sashes of the dancers are sharp knives that lash out with their movements, cutting the daughters down one by one. When dawn breaks, only one is left, the queen of Balalota. For now. In a year, the swamp will reclaim its queen, and a new group will dance for it once more. Now, I don't want to speak too soon, but I think this might be my favorite county so far. It's the mix of elements, the old and the new, the swamps and the city. I don't know, it just all kinda comes together in a way that I like. There is a resonance between the sophisticated art of theater and the ancient ritualistic rites deep in the bogs. Like 2 sides of the same coin. The superstition, the dances, calling to forgotten ghosts, the almost secret magic that comes from it all. There's something there, I feel it. But we do have 2 more counties to get through, so let's give them a fair shot. Varno is up next and addresses something you might have been wondering about. Watchers of the video on Varesia, the region named for the Varesian people, will remember that Varesians are nomadic. The Ustalavi Varesians are different in many ways, a lot more conquesty and violent, but they still have their roots. Why stay settled in Ustalav, especially when the Whispering Tyrant is on a killathon? The citizens of Varno had the exact same idea and simply dispersed to other parts of Avestan. Though I do want to point out the advantage they had geographically. Tarbafon first appeared on the western side of Ustalav, and Varno was on the eastern side, so the people here had a lot more time to prepare and way more options for where to go. Once the Shining Crusade put down the Whispering Tyrant, the descendants of Varno's citizens returned to resettle the region. Maybe it's because they didn't suffer the same way everyone else did under the Whispering Tyrant, but Varno just has a slightly different vibe from the rest of the country. Even the usual mundane problems that plague the rest of Ustalav seem lesser here. Fewer spooky monsters, and even mundane predators like wolves are less a problem. It's not free of random dangers, it's still Ustalav, and it borders Numeria, so sometimes a robot just shows up and has to be dealt with. But having seen every other county be a grab bag of supernatural horrors, Varno almost feels quaintly pastoral. And that's the real issue Varno faces, the peaceful surface hiding danger, and the approach to life that allows it to persist. The people of Varno embrace life as it comes, wary of but not fearing death. Nothing wrong with this in theory, but I think here it's allowed many things to go unaddressed, they simply let them linger. For example, the citizens of Varno think that they've just been abandoned by their count, who would rather run around abroad than attend to his people. Castle Corvishquire stands empty, overlooking the town of Corvishquire with its dwindling population. Of course, there are rumors about strange lights sometimes seen in the old Tyriak home, and someone deep in their cups might rant about how somebody ought to do something about all this, but it never goes anywhere. Why rock the boat? Things might not be perfect, but they're keeping on, right? So keep on with them. I do wonder how that might change if they knew the old Count Tyriak was still alive, and still their count, traveling to find a cure for his vampirism. I feel like that might shock a few out of complacency at least. Or what about Bastard Hall? That's a pretty big problem, right? But it's also once a century kind of problem that like 7 people, minus anyone else that happens to die for related reasons, have to deal with. Plus, I mean, they did try to burn the place down twice. The first didn't take, and the second never even got the sparks off, so it's just here now. Why not just let it be? Actually, I might be back with a smaller video on this, because there are some developments that might tie into the adventure announced for 2026 set in Bastard Hall, but we'll see. Of course, those are 2 big locations. Of course, they're going to be a little out of the ordinary and out of the scope of the regular person to deal with. What about the smaller places? Well, let's take a look at Seska. At first glance, it's just a regular town on a hill overlooking the farmlands. Outsiders looking in just see a nice, peaceful village, somewhere inviting to come and spend a few days. And that might be true, provided they don't make any mistakes. The people of Seska are constantly on alert for anyone behaving improperly. If they get even a whiff of weirdness in the air, the town can turn on a dime. Paranoia runs rampant, and entire families, if you can get them to open up, will probably tell you how they've spent whole generations in the town. For some of them, that might even be literal, having never left the town limits. That's a rarity, most just stick to the general area, but it's still a thing. And they'll tell you, why would we go? Things are pretty good here after all, right? Which again, speaks to that complacency I'm talking about. Now this next bit is entirely self-indulgent, but I had to include it. One of the rumors around Seska is a special Harrow deck. If you pull it out and start counting the cards with their faces up, you get the normal count of 54. But if you turn it upside down and start counting again, you get an extra card. This deck, called the Silent Aviary, has claimed every one of its owners, trapping them within the 55th card, the Cage. Now if you watched my Harrow video, you might know I have a bit of a theory about a lost suit of cards, and I'm always looking out for more information. And I'm wondering if the Cage just might be one of the cards in the Suit of Flames, hiding away in this small Ustalavic village. Okay, that's my indulgence though, let's hit up our last location, Redleaf. Technically it's a hamlet, as the population is around 60-ish people, however it's more accurately described as 5 manor houses cosplaying as a hamlet in a trench coat. Belonging to the Adler, Broadley, Durenwaite, Miller, and Vanache families, the collection of homes in Redleaf functions as a secluded retreat for all 5 of them. But like any gated community with generations of residents, various slights and offenses have built up a simmering undercurrent of tension between everyone here. 4 of those houses are positioned around the lake at about an equal distance, while the Adler house looms over them all on a crumbling cliff edge. Really makes the place stand out. The weird tension isn't helped by the reclusive mistress of the Adler family, Dina, who is described as spiteful, which is never the best descriptor for maintaining a good interpersonal relationship. She's been even more reclusive than usual in recent years, which is honestly making it worse, as everyone waits to see just what she's cooking. Our last 2 stops here seem pretty mundane, right? Kinda normal-ish, kinda, Dina, you really played this up, these are just average places, normal-ish? Well, there's a reason for that. Have you ever been scared all the time? It's an exhausting situation to be in, and it is hard for fiction to maintain. Stuff like a scary movie has to build up the scares, and that building process starts with tension. The creeping feeling that there is something wrong just out of sight. Everything is totally normal until you start looking at the thing. Then everything shifts, the world is a hostile place, and the nice people who were ignoring the thing turn on you for disturbing it. To me, a key part of this process is the possibility, the slight potential for it all to be nothing. Like, if you go somewhere with something obviously super wrong and the people there just can't address it, that's a different vibe. This needs to be a place right in the uncanny valley, where what's wrong is subtle, but obvious to the primal instincts in your brain. And that's what I see Varno is doing. It's the best place to live in Ustalav on the surface, because you haven't poked the thing yet. Our last county is Versex, which is how you get baby red mages in Final Fantasy XIV. One of you laughed, I know you did. This is our final county, and I want you to think about horror and see if you can remember one kind we haven't covered yet. We've gotten close, but never really honed in on this one. That's right, it's time for cosmic horror. Pick up the phone, because it's time to put in a call for insert fake sneeze here. There's just something about Versex that attracts the strange and the alien. Nestled in the hilly country between Varno and Califas, it almost feels isolated, like it's tucked between 2 shelves in the hope that you'll ignore it. The place might even have been too spicy for Tarbafon, the tyrant wiping out all life in the region during his reign. Though strangely the land doesn't have many scars from that time, almost like it barely noticed the event. I guess in the face of the infinite forever between the blinking of stars, even centuries pass like seconds through an hourglass. As people moved back in, settlers found themselves drawn to the same sites that had been previously inhabited. Subtle whispers drawing them to these places, with ruins that looked Kelid but were covered in strange markings that evoked something older, stranger, more alien. And it's here they have remained, despite locations not being the most accommodating. For example, the soil in Versix isn't the best for farming. All it really grows is tubers, and those come out looking lumpy and strange and more veiny than tubers should really look. Not a big fan of potato veins. So why does anyone live here? Now, I'm asking you, why does anyone live here? It makes no sense. Take our first location, Carrion Hill. Do I need to elaborate? It's named Carrion Hill. That's way up on the list of hills I don't want to live on. Top 5, if not top 3. Now you might say, oh Dina, maybe that's just the name that stuck after the Whispering Tyrant. Didn't you say one of his biggest guys was the Butcher of Carrion Hill? And yes, good job remembering that, A+ for you, but also no, because it was named that before he was even born. Heck, for all we know, it was living here that turned him into a necromancer eager to throw his lot in with Tar-Baphon. By the way, that guy who would go on to be the Butcher of Carrion Hill started out as the Mayor of Carrion Hill. Pretty standard political career, actually. And after all this stuff, they still kept the name. People, it's your town. You can just rename it to something other than Rotting Body Pilesville. Or, you can move. There really isn't a satisfying answer to why people live here, and that itself is concerning. Towns aren't just built anywhere at random, there has to be a reason. Not always a good reason, people do be all flavors of stupid, but dumb reasons are still reasons. So when the best I can find about why people live on Carrion Hill is, I don't know, I think trade used to come through and now we just live here, that raises some concerns. But Carrion Hill is kind of isolated from the rest of Versix, cut off by this mountain range you see here. What about the rest of Versix? Is it just as weird? Well, at least we know why the people of Heinous founded their town. It sits on top of a coal mine. As anyone familiar with mining in the real world will tell you, it's backbreaking work that can and will mess up a person for the rest of their life, if not done safely. Not only is Heinous not doing things safely, they've added danger to their mines in the form of a burning witch ghost. Black Aggie was a menace to the town over 40 years ago, and their response was to catch her, chop off all her limbs, light her on fire, and then push the body down an abandoned mine shaft. My guys, just do a regular execution. That kind of elaborate death is just begging for weird ghosts. And look what you have, weird mine ghosts. Moving south as we approach the shores of Lake Incarthen, the land transitions from rocky hills to marsh swamplands. The first city we come across is Rosenport, home to Sinkomakti University, a place for anagram lovers and occultists alike. The buildings here have a weird organic look to them, something that's setting off my something's not quite right sense. Unfortunately, we don't have much more to go on in this place. I feel like as the setting has progressed, Lepidstadt kind of absorbed a lot of the development that could happen here, while Rosenport and Sinkomakti took a back seat. I also think that's kind of fine. Galarian as a setting is designed to allow all kinds of stories, but there's something to be said about understanding where your strengths are. Other games exist that draw on this kind of cosmic horror that this place is referencing, and letting Rosenport just be a reference to that while fleshing out the more homegrown aspects of your setting elsewhere is pretty smart. To see those efforts come to fruition, we need to head south again. We're actually going to scoot down to Ilmarsh next, so I can avoid ending on an anticlimax. While notable as a location, there's not much in Ilmarsh to talk about. It's a smaller swamp town with ties to ancient cults that worship elder gods from beyond the stars. Standard stuff. Good starting point for an adventure that focuses on this kind of thing. Or a good endpoint actually, having a small band of characters try to lay siege to a town while everyone's a cultist empowered by their gods could be a neat campaign ending idea. But now we've come to the finale, the final location in Versix, Thrushmoor. The town sits at the northmost end of Lake Incarthen. I'm just going to start with the most interesting thing in the town, details can come later, we have to begin with the Star Stelae. 3 12-foot tall stone monuments placed in a triangular formation with the face each pointing towards roughly the center of town. They are covered in strange markings that at first glance could pass for Kelid, but closer examination shows the markings don't line up. And there's a strange star pattern present that's not seen elsewhere. And no, it's not a Sihedron, we're too far from Runelord territory for that. The Kelids worshipped here until they were driven out by the Varisians, who settled in the area and reconsecrated the stones, dedicating them to worshipping Pharasma and various psychopomps. That kind of worked, right up until it didn't. The downfall started with a Kelid woman named Ariadna. She was a worshipper of the ancient things the Star Stellae were meant to call to, and also a practitioner of the Kellid summoning art of god calling. She came to Thrushmoor and offered to teach the locals how to better use the god stones. Though originally skeptical, Ariadne's prayers and rituals worked. People needing guidance got prophetic dreams. Very spooky and dire prophetic dreams, but still. Those needing more concrete help found their prayers answered by a shadowy figure. While they looked sinister, this creature helped without needing anything in return. Truly, Ariadne's new faith would be a boon to Thrushmoor. Now class, here's the big question. Do you think this is all on the level? If you do, gosh, you're as trusting as you are wrong. The dreams and mysterious figure were the work of Ariadne and her 2 eidolons, bound by her god calling to do her bidding. All of this in service to her 3rd most powerful god, the Lord of the Woods. That one is an aspect of a greater being, the black goat with 1,000 young. The town quickly fell in line, and their zeal of worship exceeded Ariadne's wildest dreams. They even attacked a Pharasman inquisitor sent to investigate what was going on in Thrushmoor, protecting her from claims of heresy and witchcraft. She rewarded them with powerful heretical witchcraft, leading the entire town in a ritual to summon forth the Lord of the Woods and bring them salvation and prosperity. Everyone in Thrushmoor vanished. Ustalav had sent a mercenary company to subdue the town and figure out what was going on, and the night before their attack, they heard the strange cries of unknown rituals. Fires burned in the distance, bright enough to see, but contained enough that they were deliberate. The next morning, the adventurers found only untouched buildings and splatters of gore. The people had simply gone, though where they went and why remains a mystery in the 700 years since. Thrushmoor was considered cursed for generations, and mostly used as a hideout for criminals and desperate wanderers. But eventually people started moving back in, and today Thrushmoor is the county seat of Versex, ruled by the Lowells family. The Vanishing, and its curse, are thought long gone, and impossible to reproduce, as modern-day Thrushmoor only bears 2 of the 3 Star Stellae, the 3rd having been taken or destroyed at some point. Their history lives on in tales of the Briarstone Witch and her tattered man, used to frighten children into behaving. No one outwardly claims to worship these older gods, it's all devout Pharasmans as far as the eye can see, but there's a falseness to it, like a pantomime of everyone else, to better blend in. The strangest thing in modern Thrushmoor is its count, Hasterin Lowells IV. Hasterin was a socially awkward man who spent little time ruling his county, preferring to seclude himself in study. What he studied was incredibly vague, bordering on random. All these studies were self-directed, which led Hasterin to some interesting conclusions backed up by the belief that someone of his towering intellect could only make correct connections. That's not the weird part though, that's honestly kinda normal for scholarly members of nobility. What's weird is how he's changed. Over the past year, Hasterin Lowell's body and mental state have morphed so drastically he was almost turned away from a court meeting because no one recognized him. His awkwardness has been replaced with a mercurial temperament, and his body has aged years in the span of months. This being Ustalav, there could be any number of things wrong, but since Lowells remains hands-off in how he rules the county, most of the people working for him are content to take a wait-and-see approach. Though, I'm kind of curious, so I'm gonna do a bit of research myself into the matter. Hold on a second, I'll be right back, I need to grab a book. Okay, I can't stay long. The hounds have my scent and I barely made it out of the desolate shore. I grabbed her books on the subject, but that might not be enough. I have to risk a message. Do not let Dina look into Lowells. The 3rd Star Stellae wasn't lost, it's under his estate. He contacted something that changed him. Even knowing about it is dangerous, so I can't say its name. Don't look for it, don't even think about it. I'm already infected, but I can spare you. The text says an epithet is safe, so I'll give you this one bit. Never find the inmost blot. Once you do, it's already too late. I need to go, there's too many right angles in this room. Don't tell me I was here, it's safer for me that way. ERC, Pathfinders. Huh, couldn't find anything. Need to reorganize and reshelve my library. Sorry about that anticlimax there, Pathfinders. I tried to avoid it, but I guess it found me. I'll look into this again once I get to Strange Aeons. That AP touches on this a lot. And that's all of it. We've covered Ustalav, as it was in 4707. Feels like a lot, at least to me. Ustalav is very densely packed with stuff, likely as a result of trying to be every horror thing in a single country. There are pros and cons to this approach. On the pros side, it concentrates information. Anyone interested in making a horror-themed character or running a horror-themed game doesn't need to worry about tracking down where in the world it might be from. You can just look up where in Ustalav it is. And having it all contained in one area lets you do Monster of the Week Van Helsing-style games. As for cons, you might have already spotted the biggest one. If you're a horror fan with a broad base of knowledge about the genre, you probably thought of a few horror stories that I haven't covered here, whose premise wouldn't really work in Ustalav. Even just pulling from the Universal Monsters, we don't have standard mummies. A lot of classic horror is rooted in specific gothic aesthetic, and Ustalav is very good at that, but struggles to handle anything else. It also struggles a bit with the Planet of Hats problem. Ustalav as a country is all about horror, but that means the plots that don't touch on that feel like they don't really go anywhere. Take this succession crisis involving the prince. That hasn't been addressed yet. At all. Not even into 2nd edition, where the lore advancing has changed the surrounding areas. It made sense when Prince Rene Odranti Calavaso was a young man, sheltered and needing to grow into a proper candidate for monarchy at the start of our timeline, but in the modern time, in 4726, he's 51. He's reached the age where people start expecting kings to prepare an heir for ruling and has never taken power. Ustalav has had 2 adventure paths set here, Carrion Crown and Strange Aeons, and neither one touched on this. Now in 2nd edition, Ustalav's biggest issue is the return of the Whispering Tyrant and what that means. The country's theme has completely overshadowed its own plot. Honestly, I don't think this is entirely bad. Sometimes things just don't go anywhere. Golarion is a huge setting and we only have so much time for big adventure plots each year. You also have to consider specific interest. How many players looked at Ustalav and wanted to get into the politics surrounding the prince and his possible illegitimate nephew? Most would rather be doing adventures of original character Han Velsing Do Not Steal and store-brand Innsmouth Hullabaloo. Adding on to this, the main source of information for Ustalav I used was Rule of Fear, a book that came out in 2011. Ustalav hasn't gotten a major update since, so all the plotlines are just dangling waiting for that. I suppose you could even consider that stagnation its own kind of horror. But you can't go everywhere at once, and that's where we as players fill in the gaps, right? I'm sure someone out there has done a fantastic Ustalav campaign themed around the political conflict between the Odranti and the Calavasos, and if that's you, I'd love to hear about it. I'd also love to hear just what you think of Ustalav in general. What was your favorite county? Did you have a specific horror vibe that you liked? Or is there something you wanted to see that just never came up? I'd love to hear more from you about this, Pathfinders. Thank you all so much for watching. This script took a lot of time and energy to get done. I appreciate people's patience and understanding. I really hope to get back into the groove after this. I think I'll try and get that video about the Pathfinder Society itself out next, so please look forward to it. I'd really appreciate it if you did all the YouTube stuff, the likey, the subscribey, the ring the belly. Check out our Blue Sky and Patreon if you have the time and want to support me on social media. And until next time, thank you very much for watching, and explore, report, and cooperate.